Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere you've probably only heard about in passing whispers or scandalous footnotes at the bottom of dusty history books. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. We're plunging into the raw, unfiltered and occasionally eye-watering world of a medieval brothel. It's not all lacy corsets and candlelight flirtation like the movies would have you believe. Nope, this is the gritty kind, where you'll lose your dignity, probably your shoes, and quite possibly your ability to walk straight for a week. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. No pressure, just vibes. Also, I want to know, what city are you watching from, and what time is it where you are right now? Leave it in the comments. I love seeing where all of you night owls are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of a narrow cobbled street, somewhere in a European city. Let's say London, 1381. The sun's dropped behind the smoky rooftops and the shadows stretch long. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders, more for the smell than the cold. The air is thick with the stench of piss, ale and something meat adjacent that's probably better left unidentified. You're following a trail of lewd laughter, torchlight and perfume that smells suspiciously like boiled flowers and goat fat. And then you see it. A two-storey timbered building sagging just slightly under its own secrets. The lower windows are covered in oiled parchment, glowing orange with candlelight from inside. Over the crooked door hangs a faded sign of a painted woman with golden hair and, very anatomically enthusiastic proportions. You've arrived at the local stews, a name for brothels that has absolutely nothing to do with dinner, though you wouldn't be the first to make that mistake. The door creaks open on its own, and you step inside. It's loud. Not tavern loud, more like theatrical chaos with bad acoustics. A lute plays badly in one corner while two women argue over something in French. Possibly a customer, possibly a misplaced corset. The scent hits you full force now. A potent stew of human funk, damp straw, stale wine, mildew and cloves, like someone tried to deodorize a chamber pot with grandma's spice rack. It's everywhere, clinging to your clothes, sinking into your skin. Someone brushes past you, a man with a silk pouch and very few teeth, muttering about getting his turn. He's clearly drunk or very sick or both. You hope it's just the ale. A girl no older than 17 smiles at you as she walks by, eyes already scanning the room for her next job. You're pretty sure her smile's been practiced more times than it's been felt. A crooked stairwell hugs the far wall, leading to a shadowed second floor. You don't go up yet. Your medieval survival instincts, those you were born with just now because you're not a complete fool, tell you to stick to the edges and get the lay of the land. A large woman with rings on every finger shouts something at a pair of patrons who are brawling over what looks like a mouldy pie. She's got presence. This is clearly the madam, and she moves with the confidence of someone who knows where all the bodies are buried. Maybe literally. As you ease deeper into the room, the walls seem to close in. Everything feels smaller here. The ceilings are low enough to bump your head if you're over 5'8", and the candlelight dances against rough wood panels stained from years of spilled drinks, spit, and other less mentionable substances. There's no music drifting from invisible speakers, no neatly ironed sheets waiting upstairs. This is not the boudoir fantasy. This is the historical reality. In one corner a man is passed out with his head in a plate of something grey and mushy. A cat circles him, licking at the scraps. Another man stumbles out of a side room, adjusting his belt and avoiding eye contact with everyone. Behind a patched curtain, you hear laughter, forced, and a bed creaking in a way that sounds structural, like it might collapse entirely. You find a spot near the fireplace, or what passes for one. The hearth's clogged with ashes and half-burned wood, but it's throwing out enough heat to sting your eyes. You can feel the grime on your hands already, and you haven't even sat down. Then comes the detail that really sinks it in. The floor. It's sticky. Not like bar sticky. Sticky in a way that suggests layers like geological sediment of sorrow and spilt secrets. You shift your foot and hear an actual squelch. Congratulations. You've officially committed to the experience. And here's the historical fun fact for the evening. Medieval brothels like this weren't just tolerated in many cities. They were regulated. City officials taxed them, inspected them, and even licensed the workers, all in the name of public order. But that didn't mean they were safe or clean or even remotely humane. Most regulations were more about control than protection. If someone got sick or abused, tough luck. The city cared more about containing scandal than helping anyone. Now for your weird fringe tidbit, some brothels had their own coat of arms. No joke. There are records of certain high-end houses displaying symbolic imagery like doves, apples, or even keys. These weren't just decorative, they were meant to suggest everything from fertility to secrecy. Branding, medieval style. Makes you wonder what kind of Yelp reviews they'd have pulled in. And of course, the open debate. Historians are still split on how much choice workers really had. Some argue that, grim as it was, brothels offered more autonomy than domestic servitude or field labour. Others say that's romanticising what was often just another form of coercion. Truth is, the line between agency and exploitation here is as murky as the ale. You're starting to notice the eyes on you now, curious, assessing. You're not local, your clothes are weird, and unless you start spending money soon, someone's going to assume you're either a spy, a thief, or the kind of tourist who ends up robbed and dumped in a river by morning. Welcome to the night. You haven't been here long, but already your senses are under full assault. Smells layer on top of each other in strange, unsettling ways. Sour wine, scorched candle wax, wet wool, old fish, lavender and body odour. A lot of body odour. You don't realise how spoiled you are by modern plumbing until you're nose to wall with a society that, let's just say, has a different relationship with bathing. You make the fatal mistake of inhaling too deeply and nearly gag. The floor is sticky, yes, but the air is thick. The kind of thick that settles into your lungs and makes you wonder if your soul is now stained. And then there are the chamber pots. You spot one tucked beneath a wooden bench, another halfway under a stair, and oh God, is that one just sitting in the corner? Yes it is. And it's not empty. The people here don't seem to mind. Someone's even resting their ale mug on top of it like it's an end table. You suddenly have a lot of regrets, and you haven't even been upstairs yet. Now let's talk about your shoes. They're new, or they were new. Soft leather, nothing too fancy, but definitely not made for this. Within minutes of stepping inside, they're waterlogged, but with what, you don't know. And frankly, you don't want to know. The floor is warped and uneven, some parts slick with ale, others crunchy with straw, and still others, let's go with tacky. You sidestep a pile of something unidentifiable, brownish, glistening, probably alive, and realise you're going to have to burn these shoes if you ever make it out. In the far corner, a skinny man is furiously scratching his arms while trying to chat up one of the women. He keeps sniffing, she keeps laughing. You've never seen anyone flirt through obvious pestilence before. A rat scampers across the room and disappears behind a keg. You are not comforted. Here's your first big takeaway from the brothel environment. It's not built for comfort. It's built for utility. And even that's a stretch. Everything is repurposed, mended, barely holding together. The cushions on the benches are greasy from 1,000 nights of spilled wine and sweating bodies. The curtains separating rooms upstairs are threadbare, half torn and barely worth the name. You look up and see cobwebs clinging to the rafters, undisturbed by time or broom. But the real star of the discomfort show, the toilets, or lack thereof. Chamber pots, remember? They get emptied, eventually, if you're lucky. Otherwise, the contents get sloshed out a side door into the alley, or even right onto the street. There's a reason you saw people walking in the middle of the road outside instead of hugging the sides. Gravity is not your friend in this city. Now, you might be asking yourself, is it really that bad? Surely not all brothels were this nasty. Well, here's your historical anchor for tonight. In many medieval towns, especially the bigger ones like London, Paris and Florence, brothels were often located near rivers, docks or industrial zones. Why? Because that's where the poorest infrastructure was, and poor infrastructure equals poor sanitation. So yes, it really was that bad. Even the upscale ones couldn't escape the basic fact that indoor plumbing hadn't been invented yet, and lye soap, a luxury item, scented oils, mostly to cover rot. If you're starting to feel itchy, that's entirely appropriate. Now for something delightfully weird. Some brothels were built with what they called perfume chimneys. It sounds nice until you realise it just means stuffing herbs and dried flowers into the fireplace to mask the stench. Not clean the air, just mask it, like spraying perfume on a decomposing fish. Sometimes they'd even burn bundles of rosemary or juniper to create clouds of vaguely pleasant-smelling smoke, which somehow only made things worse by combining with all the other smells in the room into a nasal horror cocktail. Let's pause here to touch on a surprisingly debated topic. Were medieval people just dirty, or did they try to be clean but lack the tools? Historians go back and forth on this. Some argue that daily washing, at least of the hands and face, was common in certain social classes, and that bathhouses were actually popular until they got associated with immorality. Others claim the whole idea of cleanliness was radically different from our own, and that clean often meant ritually pure rather than physically scrubbed. Either way, what you're standing in now definitely does not meet any modern health code or smell test. You're still near the fireplace when you spot a worker dragging a bucket across the room. It's filled with soapy water, or what was once soapy. She sloshes it across the floor in a half-hearted attempt at mopping, which really just redistributes the grime into new, more abstract shapes. You think about offering to help, then immediately think better of it. This isn't your house. It's not even your sentry. Someone calls out behind you, and you turn to see a portly man in a fur-trimmed tunic gesturing at you like you're a misplaced bag of laundry. "You lost, duckling?" he chuckles, clearly amused by your wide-eyed horror. You nod dumbly. He grins, then claps you on the back hard enough to jostle your ribs. "First time? Don't worry, you'll get used to it. Or you won't." He walks off laughing. As the evening wears on, the place gets hotter, noisier, and somehow wetter. The fire makes the stink bloom even more aggressively. People are sweating. You're sweating. One man passes out in his chair and is promptly ignored. Another finishes his drink, vomits quietly into the corner, then asks for another round. No one blinks. It's all just part of the cycle. And here's a little secret no one tells you until it's too late. You don't notice the smell anymore. That's the truly scary part. After a few hours, your nose gives up. Your brain stops sending alarm signals. You've acclimated. And that means you've officially crossed a line you can't uncross. You take a seat on a bench that creaks ominously beneath you. The wood is slick. You're too tired to care. You look around at the people here, the workers, the clients, the drunks, the madam yelling from the stairs, and you realise this is more than just a dirty house of pleasure. It's a system, a survival mechanism, a trap and a refuge in equal parts. And you're part of it now, at least until your immune system gives out. Still feeling confident you could last a day? Yeah, we didn't think so. You finally muster the nerve to head upstairs. The staircase groans under your weight, each step announcing your presence with creaks so loud they might as well be shouting fresh meat coming through. The railing wobbles beneath your hand, half detached from the wall, and coated in something sticky that better not be blood. You're pretty sure it's not, but also not willing to investigate. Upstairs is dimmer, quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It's more like the hush of somewhere that's seen too much and doesn't want to talk about it. The hall is narrow, the ceiling low enough that you duck instinctively. Doors line the corridor, some hanging ajar, others shut with bits of fabric nailed over them in place of locks. You hear voices through the walls, soft rhythmic sounds interrupted by the occasional cough, moan, or shout. One room erupts with laughter, another with crying. It's not always clear which is worse. You glance into an open room as you pass. The bed is little more than a sloped wooden frame with a flattened mattress made of straw and rags. There's a blanket on it, something woolen and vaguely disease-coloured. No pillow. A candle stub burns in the corner, illuminating stains on the wall you really don't want to contemplate. The air here is heavier, full of sweat and cheap incense. You back away before someone invites you in. Another room has a couple sitting quietly on the floor, their heads together. The woman is older than most here, face-lined, eyes glassy. The man is mumbling, holding her hand. You can't tell if he's paying for her company or just broken in some unspoken way. They both look like they've seen war. Maybe they have. No one interrupts them. The hall creaks again, and the madam appears at the top of the stairs, glaring at you like you've wandered somewhere you don't belong. Which, to be fair, you have. "Looking for something, little bird?" she asks, voice like gravel and wine. You try to answer, but she waves you off and points to a door. "Go on, have a look, might learn something." You're not sure if it's a threat or a sales pitch. You open the door cautiously. This room's fancier than the others, or trying to be. There's a rug on the floor, a chipped mirror leaning against the wall, and actual sheets on the bed. The woman inside reclines against the headboard with the posture of someone who's played this role too many times to care. Her dress is half-laced, her hair pinned in a way that suggests it was neat this morning and gave up by lunchtime. She eyes you without smiling. What are you? A scribe? A spy? A priest in disguise? Her voice is soft but not friendly. She pats the bed beside her, and you decline with a mumbled excuse. She shrugs. Suit yourself. You're not the weirdest thing I've seen this week. There's something theatrical about the room, and not in a fun way. The props of intimacy are all there. Wine, cushions, lace curtains. But it's an act staged night after night for men who need to believe the illusion, even just for an hour. You notice a pair of boots tucked beneath the bed, clearly not hers. She sees your glance and smirks. Some don't make it far. Now's a good time to clarify something. Despite what romanticised novels suggest, these rooms weren't designed for comfort or pleasure. They were designed to function, fast and cheap. The mattress? Likely stuffed with straw, horsehair, or, if they splurged, feathers from questionable sources. The sheets? Rarely washed. The window? Non-existent or covered in animal hide. Candles provided just enough light to keep you from tripping over your own pants. That's it. No ambience, no scented oils unless you brought your own. Here's your historical fact for this section. Brothels in medieval Europe often faced strict curfews. Many had to shut their doors at dusk or just after, depending on local laws, meaning workers had to rush through as many clients as possible before closing. And these weren't generous one-hour slots. We're talking 10 to 20 minutes tops. One researcher described it as industrialised affection. It was speed dating, minus the dating, plus fleas. And now, for your fringe gem of the night, medieval brothels sometimes advertised specialties with symbols carved into the wood above their doors. A whip for the rough stuff, a pair of hearts for companionship, a moon for nighttime service. There are even accounts of coded songs or rhymes used as advertisements like filthy medieval jingles. The world's oldest marketing strategy? Probably. Then there's the debate. Scholars still argue over whether the rooms in these brothels were private or shared. Some evidence suggests multiple beds to a room, with curtains drawn between them, so you could have your moment while someone else was doing the same 3 feet away. Others say that while higher-end brothels offered private chambers, most stews didn't bother. Privacy was expensive, moaning in unison, free of charge. Back in the hallway you pass another woman, younger, red-faced and clutching a towel. Her eyes flick over you with professional disinterest. She vanishes into a room and slams the door. A second later, someone inside starts yelling about payment. You hear a slap, then silence. No one comes to help. The madam doesn't react. You realise now that these walls hold thousands of untold stories. Deals made, secrets whispered, hearts broken, lives ended. The women here aren't nameless objects of lust. They're survivors. Some are schemers, others are desperate. Some wield power in subtle ways, others are barely holding on. They learn to read people fast, to smile when needed, threaten when necessary, and disappear when danger walks through the door. You wonder what it's like to live here day after day, night after night. To spend your life surrounded by performance, danger and disease, with only brief snatches of real human connection in between. You glance into another room, where someone sleeps alone, curled up like a child. You think about the girl downstairs who smiled at you too quickly. The old woman with the scar across her cheek. The worker mopping filth with a look that said she'd rather be anywhere else. And that's when it hits you. You wouldn't last here. Not a night, let alone a day. Your body would break down, your mind would fray, your spirit would start to rot in ways you can't even describe. You're just passing through. But for the people here, this is life. This is normal. You retreat down the stairs, heart heavier, shoes squishier, soul just a bit dented. You've seen enough. For now. The madam catches your eye again as you step off the staircase, and this time she doesn't wave you off. She approaches with a gait like someone who's been climbing and descending these steps for decades. Hips slightly tilted, knees stiff, but posture unapologetically straight. Her hair is twisted into a bun, laced with silver strands and probably a knife or two just in case. She's wearing a gown that was red once but now leans toward wine-stained brown, and she smells like rose oil, pipe smoke, and iron. You suspect she could command a siege tower if the situation called for it. So, she says, planting herself squarely in front of you, you going to keep ghosting about like a lost priest, or are you here to spend? Her voice is gruff but not entirely unfriendly. You're not sure what to say. Your hesitation earns a sideways smirk. Tourist, she mutters, though the word hasn't been invented yet, and she probably means something closer to idle wanderer who doesn't tip. She folds her arms and studies you with the precision of a merchant evaluating a coin for authenticity. You think this place runs on candle stubs and goodwill, she asks. Takes coin to keep rotgut in the barrels, soap in the basin, and the bailiff off our necks. She's right, of course. This entire place is a machine, and she's the engineer, running it with sharp eyes, sharper math, and probably a side deal or two with the local constable. Madams in the Middle Ages weren't passive caretakers. They were businesswomen in a world that offered very few ways for women to gain power without marriage, religion, or scandal. Some were former sex workers themselves, others inherited or outright bought the houses from aging owners or bankrupt husbands, and they had to be brutal negotiators. Keeping the brothel running meant balancing relationships with city officials, clients, suppliers, workers, and the occasional threat with a torch and a pitchfork. This one, you suspect, could talk a bishop into a discount. Name's Anis, she says, and I suggest you stop gawking like a goose on market day, or someone's going to think you're a mark. Her eyes flick toward a man in the corner who's been eyeing your belt pouch a little too intently. You want a drink or a girl, you come through me, or you go out the back door in your underclothes. That clear? Crystal. You follow her to a heavy wooden desk near the hearth, cluttered with wax-streaked parchment, a cracked ink pot, and a tally sheet full of scrawled names and figures. There's a ledger. She flips it open, and you catch glimpses of coded notes, probably appointments, payments, and which client got which disease last week. Some of the names are crossed out with thick lines. One has a little skull drawn next to it. Charming. She gestures toward a shelf behind her, stacked with crude clay tokens and small wooden markers. Credit system, she explains. Not everyone walks in with coin, and I'm not running a charity. They pay when they can, or I send Dobbins. You don't know who Dobbins is, but you hope never to meet him. Here's your history nugget. Many brothels used physical tokens or chips as a form of payment. Clients would buy them at the door, hand them to the madam, and she'd distribute them to the workers, who could then exchange them for a share of money later, minus a cut for overhead. In theory, it kept things organised. In practice, it allowed the house to skim profits and avoid direct transactions between workers and clients. It was medieval middle management, with extra steps and fewer rights. Now for your fringe fact, some madams were so influential they wielded genuine political power. In parts of Germany and the Low Countries, certain madams had enough leverage to petition city councils, settle local disputes, or even sponsor festivals. There are records of one brothel in Cologne flying its own banner during parades. Nothing says civic pride like marching under a symbol of venereal capitalism. Of course, there's still academic debate over how much autonomy madams truly had. Some were tolerated as long as they kept things discreet and profitable. Others lived in constant fear of raids, arrests, or moral backlash. The church could look the other way, until it didn't. City officials would tax the brothel one month and shut it down the next. Power was always conditional. Stability was a myth. Back at the desk, Anis pours herself a drink from a chipped pitcher and offers you a cup. You take it, because refusing seems unwise. The liquid is something between wine and vinegar, and it burns like betrayal going down. She watches you cough with amusement. You lot always show up thinking it's going to be silk sheets and sultry looks, she says. This ain't a tale for minstrels, it's mud and math. It's trying to keep 15 girls fed, 4 windows unbroken, and the night watch paid off so they don't drag us all to the stocks. You ask her how long she's been running the place. She shrugs. Long enough to know what's worth crying over, and what isn't. She leans in, suddenly serious. These girls. They're not just working, they're surviving. Some got mouths to feed. Others got nowhere else. One's hiding from her husband. One's sending coin to her mother in Flanders. She taps her temple. I remember it all. If I forget, they get hurt. You begin to realise the place isn't just a business. It's a shelter of sorts. A war zone disguised as a tavern with extra beds. Anis doesn't run a brothel. She runs a kingdom carved out of desperation, stitched together with coin, cunning, and just enough mercy to keep it from tipping into cruelty. From the side room, a sharp scream cuts the air. Nobody flinches. Anis sips her drink. New lad, too much ale, or not enough. She doesn't seem concerned. You suppose she's heard worse. You finally ask her what happens when someone doesn't pay. She smiles, but it's not a kind one. We get creative. Sometimes we take their boots, sometimes their horse. One time I took a man's wig and wore it to market. He never came back. You're starting to suspect that Anis may be the most powerful person in this neighbourhood, and she doesn't even have to leave the building. As she turns back to her books, you realise how much unseen labour keeps this place alive. The deal's struck, the fights broken up, the bribes carefully measured, and behind it all, the quiet strength of a woman who refuses to be crushed by the machinery she helps turn. You nod, more respectful now, and she nods back like she knows exactly what's shifted between you. Then she calls over her shoulder, "Tell old Marjorie she's got a client, and don't touch the ledger again unless you want your fingers pickled." You step away quickly, but not without glancing once more at the tokens, the ink stains, and the sharp eyes behind them. You may not last a day here, but Anis, she's lasted a lifetime. You leave Anis to her ink-stained kingdom and slip sideways through a warped doorway into what passes for the brothel's break room. Though no one would dare call it that out loud. It's dim, stuffy, and only slightly less chaotic than the main floor. A few of the women are gathered around a bucket with warm water that smells faintly of soap and overwhelmingly of feet. One girl is plucking lice from another's hair while humming tunelessly. No one looks up. You suddenly feel like you've wandered into a sacred space. Not sacred in the holy sense, but sacred like a battlefield tent where the wounded regroup between fights. You take a seat on a stool, missing one leg. A nearby wall holds a series of notches carved deep into the wood, likely someone's attempt to count clients or days worked or perhaps days survived. You don't ask. One of the women, a tall brunette with sharp cheekbones and a visible chip on her shoulder, shoots you a look. "You buying or spying?" she asks, not unkindly, but definitely without patience. She has a smear of rouge on one cheek and dried blood on the cuff of her sleeve. You're not sure if it's hers or someone else's. "Don't mind him," says the younger girl beside her, nodding toward you. "He's just another ghost walking through." Her tone makes it clear you're not the first time traveller she's spotted, or at least not the first man who looked lost instead of lustful. You clear your throat and ask how long they've been working here. It's a stupid question, but it gets a laugh. "Too long," says the tall one. The younger girl shrugs. "I came here when I was 14. Thought it would be glamorous." She pops a flea between her fingers with a practised flick. It's not. The stories start to trickle in, casual as smoke. One woman was orphaned during a plague and sold to the brothel by a distant cousin. Another came voluntarily, sort of, after her husband drank away the family farm and vanished. One was a seamstress who got pregnant by a nobleman and was cast out. Another fled a convent after being caught inappropriately appreciating the company of a fellow sister. They laugh about that one, even though you sense the laughter's been rehearsed. These aren't the caricatures history likes to offer, the tragic damsel or the seductive vixen. They're just women trying to survive, each one carrying a history too heavy for a single back. Some chose this work, kind of. Others were pushed, tricked, or dragged into it. But here they are, braiding each other's hair and teasing between clients, finding humanity in the cracks. You notice the calluses on their hands. Not dainty little things, but thick, working calluses. Proof that this is labour, and hard labour at that. The job isn't just what happens upstairs. It's scrubbing, hauling, defending, entertaining, managing customers, dodging fists and putting on a show no matter how broken you feel. There's an economy to their movements, an unspoken rhythm they all fall into. They take turns with the wash basin, switch spots on the shared bench, and trade news like coins. Here's your historical truth for this chapter. In many medieval brothels, the women weren't slaves, technically. But they often lived under a contract system that bordered on indentured servitude. They owed money for room, board, clothes, makeup, food, medical care, and even laundry. Most never saw more than a fraction of the money they earned. The madame kept the rest, for their protection. Leaving often meant breaking a contract and facing prison, public shaming, or worse. So they stayed. Because what else was there? Tonight's quirky fact. Brothel workers sometimes use language known only to them, a kind of coded slang, passed down in whispers to discuss clients, prices, or warn each other of danger. In some regions, they called clients roosters, and particularly bad ones, plucked fowls. Condoms, when they existed at all, were called French letters, or sheep's hats. It's not exactly poetic, but it got the point across. And here's your open debate. Were these women exploited, or were they exercising the only form of agency they had? Some scholars argue that in a world where women had almost no power, sex work was one of the few ways to make money without marrying into servitude or being worked to death on a farm. Others say that view is overly romantic, ignoring the trauma, disease and violence baked into the industry. The truth as usual lies in the grey in between, agency twisted by necessity, empowerment mingled with pain. Back in the room, the women have moved on to a new topic, one of the regulars, a nobleman who insists on being addressed as Sir Lionheart and brings his own feathered hat to wear in bed. They mimic his posh accent and burst into giggles. He tips in buttons, one of them says they're ivory, they're bone, chicken bone. You realise suddenly that laughter is their most powerful weapon. They laugh about the clients, the madam, the city watch, the stink, the rats, the blood, the heartbreak, even the fear. It's not forced either, it's vital. Laughter keeps the rot from setting in too deep. An older woman named Johanna lights a pipe and leans against the doorframe. She's missing 2 teeth, but wears the most serene expression you've seen all night. "You think we're all sad, don't you?" she says, exhaling a curl of smoke. You start to deny it, but she waves a hand. "It's fine. Most are, but not all of us. Some of us got tired of pretending life was something else. There's honesty here. Ugly, maybe, but honest." You believe her. In a strange, crooked way, this place is more honest than the clean, polite drawing rooms you read about in medieval tales. No one here is pretending that virtue is a currency. No one's trying to sell purity. There's no room for illusions. You see people, real ones, flawed, fierce, raw. Eventually the break ends. A bell rings, more of a clang really, and the women sigh in unison, pushing up from the bench like dancers called back to stage. They fix their hair, tighten corsets, reapply rouge with damp fingers. The armour goes back on. The younger girl, the one who called you a ghost, winks as she passes. "Don't look so grim. You'll wrinkle up like old cheese." And just like that, they're gone. Back into the night, into the business of surviving, performing, enduring. You sit in the empty room for a moment longer, feeling the echo of their presence. The laughter lingers in the air like incense after a sermon. You don't know what you expected to find behind the doors of a medieval brothel, but it probably wasn't this. This chorus of complicated, unbreakable women carrying each other through one hard day at a time. You rise and head back toward the main room, a little more humbled, a little less whole. You're barely back in the main room when someone grabs your wrist. Not hard, but firm enough to freeze you mid-step. A young man, maybe 17, maybe younger, squints up at you with flushed cheeks and the telltale gleam of someone deep into his 3rd, or 12th, mug of the house's famously undrinkable wine. His tunic is open at the neck, stained with something that might be stew or might be blood, and he's grinning like he's just seen a long-lost friend. "You look like you've got coin," he slurs. "You want to split a room? I paid for the hour." He winks, but it's the kind of wink that almost knocks him off balance. You gently pull your arm free. He shrugs and stumbles toward a passing worker who expertly redirects him with a kiss on the cheek and a quick handoff to someone else. The brothel runs on this kind of choreography, a constant reshuffling of bodies, half seduced, half shoved through the night in the name of getting paid. That, of course, brings you to the money. You find yourself watching a small exchange at a side table, where a customer, older and dressed in frayed noble garb, is arguing with a younger woman over something clearly agreed upon, and now suspiciously forgotten. His voice rises. "I gave you 4 groats, I swear it." Her response is cold and calm. "You gave me 3, and the rest of you wasn't worth a halfpenny." Coins clatter onto the table as he pulls them out reluctantly, his pride clearly aching more than his purse. She scoops them up without breaking eye contact. The transaction is over, until next time. Money in a medieval brothel isn't just coin, it's leverage, survival, and power. The currency of desire is never just physical here. It's meticulously measured, haggled and catalogued. Everyone's watching. Everyone remembers. Let's break it down. The average price for a night, or more often, a few minutes, varied wildly depending on the brothel, the worker and the client. In a regulated stew, a government-tolerated brothel, prices might be fixed. A simple service could go for 1 to 2 pennies. Fancier establishments could charge as much as a shilling or more, especially for clients of noble birth or unusual tastes. Some offered bundled services like a room, food and company for a flat fee. Think of it as the world's grimiest Airbnb package, minus the 5-star reviews. But it's rarely that simple. Extra requests meant extra cost. No touching rules could be waived for a fee. Kissing was often considered a premium act. Anything unconventional, positions, costumes, even conversation, was negotiable, usually at the worker's discretion or the madam's mood. And don't forget, condoms, when available, were an upsell. Thin sheaths made from sheep intestine or linen soaked in vinegar were available for those paranoid enough to want them and rich enough to afford them. Most weren't. Tonight's historical fact. Some brothels accepted barter. If a client had no coin, they might trade clothing, food, spices, or labour. There's a recorded case in 14th century London of a man paying for a night with a roasted goose. It's unclear whether the worker accepted because she liked poultry or because she was starving. Possibly both. And the fringe fact, there were fake brothels that operated more like medieval con artist shops. Some were fronts for theft, where a woman would lure in a drunk, knock him over the head and rob him blind. Others sold the promise of sex but never delivered. Just distractions, dancing, conversation and strong drink, until the client either passed out or forgot why he came. These places skirted the edge of legality, but if the right people were paid off, they could operate indefinitely. The line between fantasy and fraud was often paper thin. And here's your debate of the evening. Who set the prices? While it's clear that madams controlled much of the money flow, some argue that workers in certain brothels negotiated their own rates and kept a larger share, up to 50% in rare cases. Others claim that even in houses where women appeared independent, they were still bound by invisible debts, social pressure, or threats of punishment. Records are murky, and much depends on the city, the time, and whether the brothel was legal, tolerated, or outright illegal. Back near the hearth, a man flips a coin in the air and calls out to the room. "Who wants an easy job?" Several heads turn. The coin gleams once, twice, then disappears into his palm. The women eye him warily. His tunic is fine silk, his boots clean, too clean. He smells like perfume soap and ambition. Anis watches from her desk but says nothing. She's seen his type before. He picks a girl with freckles and long red hair. She approaches cautiously. They speak in low tones. He presses something into her hand. Probably a ring or token, not a coin. She hesitates, then nods. They vanish upstairs. You get the sense that whatever arrangement was made, it had little to do with affection. It's politics, played out in lace and whispers. Near the door, a boy no older than 15 collects empty mugs and broken tankards. You catch his eye and he nods at the pile in his arms. "For a copper, I'll tell you who pays in full and who's full of piss," he says. There's a quiet black market of knowledge here, each coin buying a sliver of truth, or at least a convincing enough lie. You hand him a coin. He leans in. Sir Godfrey pays double if you let him cry, and that monk from St. Aldhelm's never pays a groat, swears he's taking confessions. He scurries off before you can ask more. You lean against the wall watching the ebb and flow of human traffic. Coins pass hands under tables, in sleeves, under skirts. A kiss is worth a penny. A whispered name, too. Your very presence is costing something, even if it's just patience. Time is a commodity here, and no one gives it away for free. You start to notice the quieter workers, the ones who stay in corners, eyes always scanning, lips rarely moving. They deal only with familiar clients, refuse to haggle, and disappear when things get loud. They're not rich, not flashy, but they survive. They understand the hidden math of this place. Every groat earned is a step towards something. Freedom, debt relief, a new cloak, a bribe to escape. And while the clients swagger in thinking they hold the power, coin in hand, lust in eyes, it's often the women who set the pace, decide the worth, and, when needed, change the rules. Every transaction is a performance, a gamble, a negotiation. You're not buying affection, you're renting presence. And like all rented things, it ends the moment you can't pay. By the time the candles burn low and the air turns syrupy with exhaustion, the house settles into something quieter. Anis locks a box under her desk with a key that dangles from her necklace. The ledger is closed, but the business never really ends. Somewhere upstairs, someone's already starting again. You now understand what kind of weight clings to every coin that crosses this floor, and why, in this world, the loudest thing isn't the moaning or the music, it's the clink of payment, echoing like a verdict. You take one last look at your own belt pouch. It suddenly feels very light. It starts with a flick of silk. A curtain sways open at the far side of the room, and for a moment the air seems to pause. Out steps a woman dressed in what could generously be described as a gown, though it's clearly repurposed from about 4 different older dresses and a tablecloth. It's crimson, or was once, trimmed with cheap lace and pulled tight around her waist with a belt of braided cord. Her sleeves don't match, and her bodice is missing a button, but she walks like a queen with an audience. You realise this place has its own runway, and she's just strutted down it, and the effect is, well, effective. Men lean in. One mutters something that earns him a slow smile. Even a few of the other workers pause to watch her go. The ensemble isn't about fashion. It's about signal, a kind of weaponized fabric announcing availability, confidence, and danger all at once. You can't help but be impressed, and a little horrified, because you realise this outfit isn't unusual. It's the standard. Let's talk about the wardrobe. The brothel's clothing situation is less Victoria's Secret, more Salvation Army by candlelight. No 2 women wear the same thing, and none of it is new. Everything's been stitched, patched, reshaped, and altered to death, often literally, since garments were passed down from former workers, some of whom didn't survive the job long enough to take their things with them. The styles? Eclectic. You've got puffed sleeves from last century, bodices so tight they threaten bone displacement, and skirts cut daringly short, by medieval standards anyway, which means ankles are scandalously visible. The materials? Wool, linen, and whatever can be bartered from the rag seller down the street. Silk is a pipe dream unless it's stolen or gifted. Colour is everything. Reds, purples and golds dominate. Not because they are in style, but because they scream visibility. These women aren't trying to blend in. They're trying to be seen, chosen, paid. But that visibility comes at a cost. Most of the garments are crawling with lice. You notice a few of the women scratching behind their ears, or discreetly plucking something from a hem. There's a constant rotation of brushing, boiling and airing out clothes over the hearth, and even then the results are mixed. You start to itch in sympathy. Historical moment. In many cities, brothel workers were actually required by law to wear specific clothing. In 13th century Toulouse, women working in licensed brothels had to wear striped hoods so they could be easily identified in public. The idea was part shaming, part control, and part urban traffic management. Can't have respectable wives accidentally brushing shoulders with the stews. But of course, those same respectable men had no problem finding their way to the striped hoods after dark. Here's your fringe fact. Some brothels had communal wardrobes, an entire trunk of dresses, wigs, jewellery and shoes that could be borrowed, swapped and even fought over. That trunk was basically the holy grail of the house. Legend tells of women hiding the best corsets under floorboards, or bribing each other for first pick. And yes, shoes were a big deal, especially the pointy-toed Krakows that made you look taller, richer and more impressive, even if your soles were falling off. You'll see at least 3 women tonight sharing the same pair of velvet slippers, just trading off between clients like a relay race. There's an open academic question that still causes scholarly grumbling. Did these clothes offer a kind of empowerment, or were they just another tool of control? Some researchers argue that dressing up allowed workers to construct their own identities, performing femininity in ways that earned attention and coin. Others say the costume was a prison, a forced mask demanded by the male gaze. The truth again is both. In the right hands, a gown is armour. In the wrong ones, it's a uniform. A fight breaks out near the hearth. A quick, low-simmering scuffle between 2 women over a scarf of all things. It's blue silk, probably stolen, definitely not local. Anis arrives before it escalates, snatches the scarf and tucks it into her belt. "No one gets it," she says. "Not tonight. Burn it for all I care." And just like that, order returns. You wonder how many fistfights have started over earrings, ribbons or stockings in this place. Too many. You notice a small mirror nailed to the wall. Cracked, of course. One of the workers, barely more than a girl, is adjusting a yellow ribbon in her hair. Her makeup is thick, her cheeks redder than nature allows, but it's the eyes that hit you. Blank, tired, going through the motions like a puppet winding itself up. She gives herself a half smile, then turns and vanishes behind a curtain. Another woman walks by, trailing a shawl that used to be white and is now sort of the colour of sadness. She has a slash of purple on her eyelids smudged and carries a little pouch at her waist. You ask her what's in it, and she opens it with a sigh. Inside, a patch of rouge, a bit of lard, a stub of charcoal, 2 pins, and a broken comb. Her entire beauty kit. She shrugs. It's enough. And yet, for all its limitations, the costume works. One moment they're weary and coughing. The next, they've transformed. Posture straightened, chin lifted, lips pursed just so. They become symbols, icons, performances you could almost believe. The clothes, the gestures, the little touches, they blur the lines between survival and theatre. What you're seeing isn't seduction. It's a system. You catch a glimpse into the laundry room, if you can call it that. A pair of buckets, a few slats of wood for scrubbing, and a line of damp garments steaming faintly in the smoky air. The scent of lye soap and mildew punches you in the face. The woman tending it looks about 45, but is probably 28. Her hands are raw, her feet are bare. She's muttering to herself in a language you don't recognise. Her world is laundry and silence. At some point, a young man, you think his name is Wilkin, enters with a bundle of cloth. He's blushing. "Found these behind the bed," he mumbles, dumping the pile near the buckets. The laundress glances up, snorts, and throws a sock at his head. Back near the hearth, a woman named Bet is stitching up a torn hem. She's cross-legged, bent over the fabric with the precision of a tailor. You ask where she learned. "My mother," she says, "taught me how to sew, not how to—" She trails off, then smirks. Well, she did her best. The night continues, dresses swapped out, sleeves pinned, ribbons exchanged like currency, and you start to notice how much these women depend on each other. Not just for camaraderie, but for literal upkeep. They fix each other's outfits, hide stains, share rouge, warn each other about customers with grabby hands or bad breath. It's not fashion, it's defense, and the transformation works both ways. You glance at a man staring at one of the women like she's a vision, not realising that her bodice is held together with pigot thread, and one of her stockings is an old sleeve. Doesn't matter. The illusion is complete. You pull your cloak tighter, feeling underdressed in a house where every garment means something, every hemline is a tactic, and even a ribbon can spark war. In a brothel like this, fashion isn't frivolous. It's survival sewn into seams. There's a particular staleness in the air now that you can't unnotice. It's not the wine or the mould or even the chamber pots. No, this is sharper, thicker, alive in its own way. The sour, acrid tang of sickness. Not the kind you walk off with broth and a blanket, but the deep-in-your-bones kind. You can feel it pressing against your skin like wet cloth. It hides in the corners, clings to doorknobs, waits in sheets, and everyone here is pretending not to smell it. You head back toward the rear hallway, where a crooked door marked with a fading chalk symbol leads to what Anis calls the healer's nook. It's not a real infirmary, it's a storage closet with a stool, a few jars of herbs, and a bed that creaks when you look at it. The healer, if you can call her that, is an older woman named Wren, mostly blind, but with a nose like a bloodhound and fingers that move with spooky precision. She's hunched over a boiling pot when you arrive, stirring something that smells like rosemary and despair. "Don't sit on the bed," she says without turning around. Last one who did had the pox. You stand very still. She ladles the contents of the pot into a chipped mug, then hands it off to a pale girl shivering under a shawl. The girl drinks it like it might be the last thing she does. And it might. Welcome to the disease wing. Or rather, the place where sickness gets ignored just long enough to keep the money flowing. You've heard whispers all night. He's got the itch. She caught the burning. Don't let him touch your mouth. Here, illness is background noise, like the lute music or the soft thud of footsteps overhead. Everyone's infected with something, or at least terrified they are. The medieval brothel was a breeding ground for disease. No surprise there. You have constant physical contact, no concept of germ theory, questionable hygiene, and a rotation of clients whose only shared trait is their lack of discretion. Add to that the communal linens, reused wash water and shared makeup pots, and you've got yourself the perfect microbial party. Wren points to a shelf lined with small vials. "That one's for boils," she mutters. "That one's for itch. That one's useless, but folks like the colour." She laughs, then coughs. then spit something chunky into a rag. You try not to gag. Tonight's historical reality: brothels were among the earliest hotspots for what they called le grand mal, the great sickness. We now know it as syphilis, but back then they just called it the pox, and it wasn't subtle. Think ulcers, facial collapse, madness, and eventually death. It ran rampant through houses like this, and while the wealthier clients could afford a treatment, usually a mercury rub that was almost worse than the disease, most workers had to just suffer through. The best they could hope for was a few good weeks between outbreaks. Here's your quirky fact for the night. Some brothels hung herbs and garlic over the doors as protection. Not against clients, but against miasmas, the invisible bad air that doctors believed caused disease. You'll see bundles of rosemary, lavender, and even dried orange peel dangling like charm bracelets from every ceiling beam. Of course, they didn't work, but the smell was slightly less terrible than the usual stench, so no one complained. And now, the academic argument that never goes away. Did brothel workers have access to better healthcare than the average peasant, or worse? On one hand, they were in cities, near apothecaries, sometimes even attended by midwives or chirurgeons who specialised in women's complaints. On the other, they were often treated as disposable. If a woman got sick and stopped working, she was either sent to a hospital, where she'd likely die, or out onto the street. The answer depends on where, when, and who's writing the history. Back in the corner, a man is groaning. His face is blistered, his breath foul. Wren dabs at his neck with a cloth soaked in something brown and steaming. He keeps coming back, she says. Spends coin he should have used on soap. His wife's the real sick one, doesn't know he's here. You catch movement from the curtain and see a worker slip in quietly, face pale, hand pressed against her ribs. Wren waves her over. Flora's bleeding again, she says to no one in particular. Can't stop it this time. There's no urgency in her voice, just weariness. The kind of fatigue that comes from watching the same injuries play out in different bodies. You ask if the girls ever get real doctors. Wren snorts. Doctors? For us? They come around if someone's pretty enough or rich enough. Mostly we get students. Practice cuts, try out salves. They like to watch us die slowly. It's educational. A moment later, Wren holds up a jar and shakes it. Inside is a dried clump of something unidentifiable. That there, she says, was a cure once. Man brought it from the east. Said it had fixed the burning. It fixed his bowels instead. He died farting lavender. You believe it. You glance at the door and see a small line forming. Workers waiting to be seen. One has a bite mark on her shoulder. Another is holding a cracked tooth in a cloth. A third just keeps scratching her arms. They don't cry. They don't even speak. They just wait their turn, like women queuing for bread or mercy. Anis walks in briefly, surveys the line and nods. Move fast, she tells Wren. We've got a party coming in from the Merchants' Guild. I need them painted up, not falling over. And that's the real horror, isn't it? These women are expected to serve, smile, flirt and perform, even when their bodies are failing. You don't get sick days in a brothel. You get sick, and then you work until you can't stand. Then you sit. Then you're replaced. You see Flora again, now slumped on the bed you were warned not to touch. Wren's applying something dark and wet to her thigh. The younger girl winces but doesn't make a sound. You catch her eyes for a moment. There's something there. Not pain, not even fear. Just resignation. Like someone who's already started saying goodbye to their body. And that's when you start to really get it. This place isn't just worn. It's dying. A little more every night. The walls don't just lean. They sag with sorrow. The floorboards groan under the weight of too many stories, most of them unfinished. The brothel breathes, barely, through the lungs of women who aren't allowed to stop. You turn to leave, but Wren calls after you. You'll want to wash before you go. There's lye soap out back, and a prayer if you can afford it. You don't ask what she means. You already know. You step back into the main room and immediately feel the shift. The place has filled up like a blister, louder, hotter, sweatier. The fire's been stoked, though the smoke curls through the rafters like it's trying to escape. A sour song clings to the air, played lazily on a battered lute by a man who's clearly 3 cups past sobriety. Somewhere under the music, the low murmur of conversation rumbles like an undercurrent, punctuated by laughter that never quite sounds genuine. You watch a new wave of clientele stumble in, wrapped in silks and smugness, shedding dignity with every swaggering step. It doesn't take long to notice the contrast. These men, merchants, clerks, city guards, even one or two who look like junior priests out for field research, they move through the brothel like they own the place. The way they scan the room, the way they grab at arms and waists without asking, the way they bark for wine like they're in some feudal tavern play. The workers meet them with practiced grace, a flutter of lashes, a measured lean, a gentle nudge in the right direction. It's not flirtation, it's choreography. One man calls out to a girl named Laura, offering a coin with one hand and slapping her backside with the other. She forces a laugh. He smells of salted meat and entitlement. You see her eyes go flat for a second before she spins and leads him upstairs, still laughing, hips swaying just enough to keep him happy. He thinks he's won something. She thinks about dinner. This is your nightly clientele, a blend of drunkards, cowards and opportunists, but let's not pretend it's just peasants. Among them you'll spot a man in a fur-lined tunic bearing a crest on his sleeve. He's minor nobility, clearly slumming it. He sips from a pewter cup and whispers something to a girl with bare feet and a swollen lip. You see a local magistrate by the door, hair oiled, face ruddy. He's well known in the city for prosecuting brothels on Sundays and visiting them on Thursdays. And yes, there's a monk in the corner, or at least a man dressed like one. Hood back, tonsure gleaming, fingers thick with rings. He's sipping spiced wine and trying to look like he isn't checking out a pair of girls whispering in the corner. Every so often, he mutters a prayer under his breath, which might be for forgiveness or just habit. Either way, he'll leave lighter in coin and heavier in guilt. Here's your historical fact. In many medieval towns, brothels weren't just known to the authorities, they were frequented by them. Clergy, tax collectors, and even city guards were common visitors. In places like Avignon, Florence and London, records show that priests and monks were among the most frequent clients. Some towns even had laws allowing religious men to visit under certain discreet conditions. So, the next time you imagine a pious medieval man meditating in solitude, add a footnote. He might have stopped here first. Now for your fringe trivia, certain brothels kept guest books. Yes, guest books. Not for public display, of course, but for internal tracking. They'd write notes about regular clients, what they liked, what they tipped, how long they stayed, and what they'd promised but never paid. Annis has one, locked in a chest beneath her desk. You saw it briefly earlier. Worn leather, initials inked along the spine. The ledger, she calls it. You suspect she could bankrupt half the city with what's written inside. Then there's the ongoing historical debate. Did brothel workers wield social power through their client lists? Some scholars argue that because they had access to secrets, who visited whom, who cried afterward, who begged for things that would ruin their reputations, they held a unique kind of influence. Others say those secrets only mattered when backed by money or connections, and that the women rarely had either. It's possible that both are true, depending on whether you were the madam holding the ledger, or the girl whose name no one bothered to learn. Back at the hearth, two clients are arguing. One insists he paid for the French service, which seems to involve feather plumes and a lot of yelling. The other insists it's his turn, waving a chipped token like it's a royal decree. Annis appears without a sound, plucks the token from his hand, bites it, literally bites it, then pockets it. "This one's fake," she says. "Both of you can sit and think about your choices." They shut up. One slinks to a bench. The other tries to pet a cat that appears just long enough to scratch him, then disappears into the shadows. You start to understand how tightly controlled this place is, even when it looks chaotic. Like a puppet show where you never see the strings. You pass a side alcove where two women are seated with a group of men playing dice. It's not clear if the game is part of the entertainment or just something to do while waiting their turn. One of the women is winning. She's laughing too loudly, her tankard untouched. The men don't seem to notice. You suspect they've already lost their money, and she's about to walk away with their dignity as well. A man with wine-stained lips staggers past you, grabs a girl by the wrist and yells for the special treatment. She leads him through a door with a bored expression, and another girl rolls her eyes. "Special," she mutters, just means he's going to fall asleep before he gets his boots off. There's no romance in this room, just transaction, just repetition, just the calculated performance of intimacy. You watch a woman smile at a man who smells like horse urine and cloves. She cups his face, whispers something you can't hear, and for a moment he looks like he might cry. Then she takes his hand and leads him away, leaving behind only the echo of his soft, broken laugh. This place is a theatre, and every night it runs the same play. Act 1, arrival. Act 2, performance. Act 3, the slow retreat into sleep, sorrow, or syphilis. You start to feel like a ghost drifting between scenes, invisible and powerless. You don't belong here, not really. You're an intruder in the middle of someone else's exhaustion. But still, you can't stop watching. Because behind the grimy wine and the moaning and the curtain calls, there's something real here. Something raw. The clients come and go. Their faces blur together. But the workers, they're the ones holding the threads, weaving a life from scraps. Their stories, spoken and unspoken, hang in the air like smoke. And the cruelest part, most of the men who pass through this brothel won't remember a single name. You don't see the priest until he's already halfway up the stairs, robe lifted just enough to show dusty boots and legs pale as candle wax. He's trying to be discreet, hood up, eyes down, but discretion in a brothel is like wearing perfume to a battlefield. A charming thought, completely pointless. A few people watch him go with thinly veiled amusement, while one of the workers murmurs, "St. Gregory rides again." Someone snorts. You get the feeling this isn't his first visit. And this, finally, is the part they never tell you in the tidy histories or pious sermons. The church was never far from places like this. In fact, it often shared a wall. You settle back into your corner and start to notice how many little hints of religious presence are scattered throughout the room. A small wooden cross hangs above the hearth, singed and crooked. A broken rosary is looped around a nail near the entryway. In one shadowy alcove, a girl named Yvette is sewing a patch onto her sleeve while humming what sounds suspiciously like a church hymn. You ask about it, and she doesn't even pause. "Keeps my hand steady," she says. "Old habits." It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? Religion and brothels, opposites you'd think. And yet, in medieval cities, they were frequently found in very uncomfortable proximity. Sometimes, quite literally, a brothel would sit across the street from a chapel. One building for sins, the other for forgiveness. It was like a two-stop soul loop. Indulge, then confess, then repeat. Historical reality? Many medieval churches actively participated in regulating brothels. They weren't always happy about it, but they were certainly involved. In some cities, the church owned the land the brothel stood on and collected rent. In others, priests served on the committees that determined which houses were official and which weren't. The idea was that if the sin couldn't be stopped, it could at least be taxed and managed, and conveniently exploited. That priest from earlier, he's not an anomaly. Records from as far back as the 12th century show that monks and clergymen were regular clients at brothels despite vows of chastity. In Avignon, home to multiple popes during the 14th century, the church-adjacent brothels were known for offering clerical specials. No, that's not a joke. And yes, it meant exactly what you think. The contradiction is breathtaking. The same men preaching virtue in the morning would sneak down side streets by lantern light at night. In one famous scandal, a bishop in England was discovered keeping a personal mistress who ran her own brothel. When questioned, he insisted it was a form of charity. He was helping fallen women find their path. Right. But here's where things get even messier. Some brothels hired their own confessors. That's right. Priests would come weekly to hear the confessions of the workers, sometimes right in the house itself. These visits were half spiritual maintenance, half PR stunt. The church got to say, "See, we're not ignoring these poor sinners." Meanwhile, the workers got absolved with vague penances and went back to work with a lighter conscience, or at least a quieter one. Tonight's fringe fact. A few religious orders actually ran brothels. No, really. There's evidence that certain institutions took in women at risk of sin, only to exploit them through penitential service, which, guess what, included sex work. They framed it as a reformatory effort, but the results looked suspiciously like indentured prostitution with a choir and occasional prayer. And the scholarly debate? It rages on. Some historians argue that the church was simply a product of its time, trying to balance moral ideals with the grim realities of medieval urban life. Others claim the church was complicit, using brothels as a quiet safety valve to protect elite men from scandal and maintain patriarchal control. Either way, the hypocrisy is as pungent as the chamber pots. Back downstairs, the mood has shifted. The priest has reappeared, his hood lower, his steps slower. He doesn't look guilty. He looks relieved. One of the women follows a few paces behind, counting coins in her hand. She's whistling. Another man sidles up to the hearth, tosses a few pennies into a small dish, and lights a candle beneath a tiny wooden icon of the Virgin Mary. You look around, half expecting someone to laugh, but no one even reacts. It's normal here. Light a candle, kiss a worker, whisper a prayer, throw up your dinner, start again. A cycle so dizzying it's almost poetic, if poetry had lice and liver rot. You sit beside an older woman named Mara, who's plucking thorns from her palm. You ask her if she believes in God. She gives you a look like you've asked whether fish believe in swimming. "Course I do," she says. "He's the only one up there who doesn't ask me to take off my dress." You ask if that helps. She shrugs. Depends on the day. Nearby, two girls argue about a customer who left behind a small wooden cross. One says it's cursed, the other says it's lucky. They flip a coin to decide who gets to wear it for the night. You're not sure who wins, or if anyone really does. Anis walks past, muttering about taxes and lace shortages. She sees you watching and smirks. What, you expect lightning to strike us all dead? She gestures at the room. This place is full of saints. Suffering, sacrifices, miracles. Sounds like a damn holy order to me. You glance again at the crooked cross above the hearth. The wood is splintered, the surface dark with smoke. But it's there, somehow still hanging on. The irony, of course, is that brothels like this often did more for their workers than the church ever managed. They offered shelter, food, sisterhood, even the occasional laugh. And when the night got too cold or the sickness too strong, they lit candles. Not just for prayers, but for light, warmth, memory. The priest leaves through the side door. No one speaks as he goes. You realise that in this world salvation doesn't come from sermons. It comes in coin and clean water and someone remembering your name. You decide not to light a candle, not because you don't believe, but because tonight you'd rather let the darkness be honest. You hear the tavern before you see it. Somewhere beneath your feet the floor thumps with heavy boots and the crash of tankards meeting wood. There's shouting, coughing, a burst of drunken laughter, and then, unmistakably, the sound of someone vomiting against a wall. You glance toward the crooked stairs that lead down and hesitate. Upstairs was dangerous in its own way, but this feels like the belly of the beast. Still, curiosity wins, and down you go. The air thickens immediately. It's hotter down here, damper too, and full of the kind of layered stink that can only be achieved through years of fermented misery. There's the rot of spilled ale, the sourness of unwashed bodies, the yeasty breath of cheap bread, and a sharp tang of dried blood and pickled onions. Your eyes water. The stairs complain. One nearly buckles beneath your step. But somehow, you make it to the bottom without breaking a leg or contracting something. The tavern itself is more cavern than room. Low ceiling, smoke-stained beams, and walls so damp you suspect they're growing things. The light comes from a few sputtering tallow candles and a single iron lantern that someone's knocked crooked. It swings ominously over the central table where four men are arm-wrestling with alarming violence. The crowd cheers every slam of an elbow or overturned drink. At the far end of the room, a fiddler plays a tune with the enthusiasm of someone paid in threats. And yes, this place is technically part of the brothel. It's all one grimy enterprise. The tavern draws them in, the girls close the deal, and the madam skims a tidy profit off both ends. Anis is nowhere in sight, probably busy tallying numbers upstairs, but you spot her assistant, a lanky man with a permanent sneer and a scar that looks suspiciously like it came from a chamber pot. You take a seat on a bench near the wall. It's sticky, of course. Everything here is sticky. A cat slinks past your foot, dragging something unidentifiable in its mouth. You try not to look closely. Next to you, a man slams back his mug and slurs out a toast. To the Queen of the South Alley, may her kisses stay warm and her boots stay dry. The room erupts in laughter. Someone throws a piece of bread that hits the fiddler. The fiddler keeps playing. Professional. A girl walks through, balancing a tray of mugs so effortlessly she might as well be floating. She avoids hands, dodges elbows, and somehow even steps over a puddle without looking. Her face is unreadable, not bored, not amused, just focused. She delivers her drinks, pockets a few coins, and disappears through a side door without a word. You ask the man beside you if he knows her. He squints at you, then grins. That's Ginny. Don't let her fool you. She's got a knife in her boot and a sharper one in her mouth, he belches. Told me once she used to sing in a church choir. Now she sings murder if you touch her wrong. It's hard to tell where the brothel ends and the tavern begins. The workers pass through both, adjusting pace and posture depending on the room. Some clients never make it past the ale, too drunk, too broke, or too busy sobbing into their cups. Others spend the night, bouncing between the two, losing money and brain cells with each trip. And sometimes things take a turn. Tonight's historical reality. Many medieval brothels included taverns as part of the business model. It made financial sense. Get men drunk, get them aroused, and keep them in-house. Some brothels even brewed their own beer, often of dangerously questionable quality. Health inspectors weren't really a thing, and what passed for ale was sometimes closer to pond water with dreams. Still, it worked. The alehouse lured them in. The girls sealed the deal. Here's your quirky little gem. Some brothel taverns offered entertainment in the form of poetry duels. Yes, really. Patrons would challenge each other to filthy rhyme contests, sometimes even judged by the workers. Think medieval rap battles, but with more lice and fewer teeth. Losers had to buy drinks or endure mockery for the rest of the night. Winners, well, they got slightly less mockery. And tonight's scholarly bickerfest centres around this. Were these taverns community hubs or just dens of sin? Some historians argue that brothel-linked alehouses were where information flowed. Gossip, politics, even business deals. Others insist they were toxic holes that destabilised neighbourhoods, spread disease, and fueled violence. The answer is, predictably, yes. Both things were true. It just depended on which side of the tankard you were sitting. Back in the room, a fight breaks out. Not a big one. Just two men grappling over what appears to be a spilled drink or possibly a woman's name. The bouncer, a man with shoulders like oxen and a nose permanently shifted sideways, steps in and cracks a stool across one of their backs. The noise barely registers. The music continues. The fiddler doesn't miss a beat. You notice something else now. A few of the workers watching from the corners. Not working, not drinking, just observing. Their eyes move constantly. They see everything. Who's got a fat purse? Who's angry? Who's scared? Who's likely to tip and who's likely to snap? They catalogue it all. Survival depends on it. One of them, a dark-haired woman with a torn bodice and a chipped tooth, sees you watching her and raises her mug in mock salute. Her smile is equal parts amusement and warning. You raise your cup back and take a sip. It's awful, like drinking sadness. There's an unexpected camaraderie down here, though, a strange sort of tavern brotherhood. These men will argue, fight, even stab each other in the thigh, but they'll still raise a glass at the end of the night. It's not about friendship, it's about ritual, and like all rituals, it masks something deeper. Loneliness, failure, desperation. They drink to forget they can't afford better. The women watch to remember who might be dangerous later. You get up to leave and almost slip in a puddle of something unspeakable. Your boots are officially cursed. On your way out, a man shouts, "Hey!" You. "Forgot your dignity!" Laughter erupts. You wave back. Let them have their fun. You've seen more than they know. Climbing the stairs again feels like surfacing from deep water. The air is no cleaner, but it's less violent, less heavy. You catch your breath at the top, heart still thumping to the rhythm of fists, fiddles, and fractured pride. The tavern below continues its endless loop of drinking, laughing, and bleeding. Another fight will break out before midnight. Another coin will land in a girl's hand with the weight of a secret. Another man will fall asleep on the floor, and no one will remember any of it tomorrow. It begins with a scream, not one of terror, though that would almost be easier to process, but of pure rage, sharp and deliberate, slicing through the hum of the brothel like a hot knife. Heads turn, dice stop rolling. Even the lute player flinches and mutes his strings. Another scream follows, higher pitched this time, tangled with sobbing and the sound of something heavy being hurled across the floor upstairs. You take a step toward the staircase, but no one else moves. That's the unsettling part. No rush, no alarm. Just a few sighs, a muttered "not again," and Anis rising slowly from her stool by the ledger like a queen summoned by chaos. "Betenclair," she mutters under her breath. "Again, damn fools." She doesn't rush. She walks with the kind of practiced calm that only comes from breaking up fights at least twice a week, maybe more. You follow her up the stairs at a respectful distance, unsure if you're part of the help or just the next obstacle to be shoved aside. At the top, the scene is already spiralling. Claire, a wiry woman with red curls and a voice like cracked glass, is swinging what used to be a candlestick. Bet, the taller of the two, stands barefoot and bleeding from a split lip, her fists clenched, chest heaving. A small group of women hover nearby, trying not to be noticed. "I told you to keep your hands off my stuff," Claire shrieks, brandishing the candlestick like a sword. "That blue ribbon was mine. Mine! I wore it on St. Agnes's Day, ask anyone." "You lost it," Bet snarls, spitting blood onto the floor. "I found it, and I wore it because you're too busy opening your legs for anything with a coin." The candlestick goes flying. Bet ducks and lunges. You flinch, but Anis steps between them like a wall in skirts. She doesn't yell. She doesn't need to. Her presence alone stills the room. She puts one hand on Claire's shoulder, the other on Bet's chest, and speaks low and firm. "Enough." It's not a suggestion. "You want to slap each other silly? Fine, but you do it outside, not where my clients can hear." Her eyes narrow. "You scare a customer off and you'll both be washing linens for a week, and not just the clean ones." The two women pull apart, snarling but subdued, chests rising and falling like bellows. Claire rubs her temple. Bet wipes her mouth with the back of her hand and mutters something too soft to catch. "You want the ribbon?" Anis says finally. "You can both wear it. Tie it to the damn doorknob, share the smell." The crowd disperses quickly after that. Crisis averted. Sort of. This, you're told later, is just another evening. Conflict among the workers isn't rare. It's baked into the system. They live, sleep, bathe, bleed, and work under the same roof. They compete for clients, attention, and resources. And every woman here knows the stakes. One lost customer means one less meal, one more night in the coldest room, one more mark against you in the ledger. You catch up with Bet downstairs later as she nurses a mug of watered wine and a bruised ego. She laughs bitterly when you ask if the fights are always that dramatic. "Dramatic?" she says. "That wasn't even top 5. She shifts, winces. "There was a night we broke the stair rail. Had to climb the floor beams like rats for a week." Her tone softens as she stares into her cup. "It's not hate, you know. Not really. Claire and I... Hell, we shared a bed during the frost last winter. Held each other like sisters. But when you're tired and starving and someone takes what's yours..." She trails off. "It's hard to explain to someone who's never lived it." And here's your historical fact for the hour. In many brothels, women lived in dangerously tight quarters, often sharing beds, dresses, makeup, and customers. Tensions rose quickly. Fights were common, and not just verbal. There are court records detailing hair-pulling, knife slashes, eye gouges, and even instances where entire houses brawled with rival brothels over turf or clientele. Imagine a turf war fought with rouge pots and petticoats. It wasn't pretty. Now for your fringe tidbit. Some madams hosted unofficial discipline nights, where grudges could be settled in controlled brawls, watched, of course, by clients who paid extra to see the spectacle. A horrifying mix of reality TV and cockfighting, centuries before either existed. Whether this was empowerment or exploitation depends on who was holding the purse. And here's the scholarly mud wrestle. Were these rivalries encouraged by madams to keep the women too distracted to unite? Some historians say yes, divide and conquer. If the workers turned on each other, they wouldn't organise for better pay or protection. Others argue the infighting was organic, a natural consequence of the brutal economics, the claustrophobic living, and the emotional wreckage that built up night after night. Back at the hearth, Claire sits with her knees drawn up, a cold cloth pressed to her forehead. One of the younger girls, maybe 14, is gently braiding her hair. Neither speaks. The air between them buzzes with unspoken rules. You start to notice it more now, how quickly tempers rise and how quickly they fade. An insult becomes a slap, then a hug. A borrowed comb becomes a battle, then a joke. These women exist in a constant state of friction, held together not by affection, but by shared suffering. They're sisters, rivals, and war buddies all at once. And it's not just about ribbons or clients. Sometimes the fights are about things they can't name. Grief, fear, shame, hunger. One girl sobs because she broke her sandal strap. Another snaps because someone used her mirror. They're not fighting each other. They're fighting the world. They just don't have any other target. Anis knows all of this. She's seen it happen over and over. She lets the fights happen within reason, because sometimes letting the pressure out keeps the house from exploding. You ask her later if it ever gets better. She looks at you like you've asked if the sun ever takes a day off. No, she says, but sometimes it gets quieter. That night, as the brothel winds down, you hear soft laughter from one room, in another quiet weeping. Somewhere someone's singing off-key. And in the washroom, Bet and Claire are sharing a basin, rinsing their faces, passing a bit of lard soap back and forth without comment. Tomorrow they'll fight again. Or maybe they won't. But tonight, there's peace, or something close to it. You're not exactly eavesdropping. Okay, maybe you are. But when the conversation drifts your way, it's impossible not to lean just a little closer. You're seated on a rickety bench near the hearth, where the fire has died down to a soft red glow, and the clatter of tankards has faded into the hush of low murmurs and muttered secrets. The room is shifting into its later phase, the part where people forget to keep their voices down and their masks up. Across from you, a man in a faded green surcoat leans toward one of the women, Syl, a sharp-eyed worker with a voice like smoke and a memory like steel. His hands are gesturing wildly, and his voice, though hushed, carries just enough to catch the edges. I'm telling you, the Duke plans to ride through the northern gate, not the main one. They're stockpiling grain behind the old granary. It's going to happen by Tuesday. If the watch isn't ready... Syl cuts him off with a raised eyebrow. And why are you telling me this? He stammers. Because I trust you. She doesn't laugh. She leans in close and says something you can't hear, but it ends with him handing over a small pouch of coins. She disappears upstairs. He finishes his drink, then stares into the empty cup like it just told him a secret. That, right there, is the other economy in this place. Not just bodies or wine or warmth, but information. You start noticing the signs everywhere. A man with a merchant's pin on his collar chatting too comfortably with a soldier's mistress. A scribe whispering to a girl who, judging by her Latin pronunciation, was probably better educated than he is. The woman who pretended to be asleep in the corner, she's not sleeping. She's listening, carefully. Because brothels, especially the well-run ones, weren't just about carnal pleasure. They were hubs of knowledge, little pockets of espionage dressed up in lace and laughter. Men talked here. They dropped names, made boasts, confessed, bragged, wept. They let things slip they'd never say in daylight, to wives, to colleagues, to confessor. But a woman who's just touched you, laughed with you, flattered your pride, you trust her, you talk. Historical reality. In cities from Florence to London to Prague, brothels were often considered intelligence hotspots. Spies worked here. Messages were passed through workers. Political plots, trade secrets, even military movements. Everything filtered through these places. Sometimes deliberately, sometimes drunkenly. More than a few revolts began with pillow talk, and it wasn't always passive eavesdropping. Some women were very active participants. There are documented cases of brothel workers acting as informants for local officials, nobles, even foreign agents. Not always because they wanted to. Sometimes they were paid, sometimes coerced, sometimes they just understood that knowledge was power, and power might buy you one less slap or one more night indoors. Tonight's fringe fact. There was a brothel in medieval Brussels rumoured to have its own bookkeeper, whose only job was to record overheard secrets. Not client names, those were protected, but details about shipments, debts, alliances. She kept them in code, disguised as prayers, a ledger of whispered sin. The book disappeared during a citywide fire in the 1400s and was never recovered, though conspiracy theorists insist it was stolen by a rival house. Now for the scholarly debate. Were brothel workers genuinely influencing politics, or were they just used by those who could? Some argue that madams and workers held tangible sway over city affairs, subtly of course, because they had access to vulnerable men. Others say the influence was overstated, that anything overheard was filtered upward and sanitized before it ever mattered. What's clear is that brothels were never just background. They were woven into the very pulse of the cities they served. You drift toward the back hallway, where voices echo through thin doors. Behind one, a man is weeping. Behind another, a woman is laughing in that hollow, theatrical way that makes your chest ache. Near the kitchens, 2 workers lean against a doorway, smoking pipes and trading information the way others might trade bread. The baker's boy said the South Mill's been turning at night, one says. What for? Flour's already rationed. The other shrugs. Could be coin smuggling, or something worse. You didn't hear it from me. They pause as you approach, giving you that now familiar once-over. You're not here for what they're selling, and you're not local, which makes you a potential liability, or an opportunity. You got ears, one of them says finally, and you've kept your mouth shut so far. That's rare. She exhales a puff of smoke and adds, if anyone asks, we never said a thing. There's a rhythm to the way trust works here. First they ignore you, then they test you, then maybe, just maybe, they let you stand close enough to hear. You return to the main room and watch as a woman you haven't seen before emerges from the stairs, holding a folded slip of parchment. She slips it into the lute player's coat as she walks past. No one notices, or rather everyone pretends not to. That's the dance. Eyes forward, mouths closed. Secrets pass like heat in this house. Anis appears beside you and follows your gaze. Don't bother asking, she says. What you don't know can't get you dragged in front of the bailiff. You nod slowly. Doesn't it scare you? She considers this. Sure, every day, but it pays better than lacework, and I never liked sewing. Later that night, a merchant storms out, furious, mumbling something about betrayal and forged papers. A woman watches from the window with a smile that's all teeth. You begin to realise how much power lives in these walls, not in gold, not in brute force, but in what people say when they think no one's listening. And here, someone is always listening. If you had any illusions left about this place being romantic, or even tolerable, they vanish the moment you're invited to dinner. And by invited, we mean someone yells from the back room, if you want food, grab it before the cat does. And a door slams open to reveal a long splintered table, surrounded by stools in various states of surrender. The kitchen smells like a crime, the kind of scent that demands a priest and several buckets of lime. There's a stew pot on the fire, bubbling with something the colour of regret, and a haunch of something roasted over the flames that might once have been eel or possibly boot leather. You're told it's market meat, which is about as specific as calling something mystery fluid. The table is already crowded. Workers, stable hands, a few regulars too drunk to be kicked out, all gathered around plates of hard bread, waxy turnips, and something red and shiny that nobody touches. You take a cautious seat next to a girl named Lisa, who immediately snatches your spoon and swaps it for a cleaner one. That one had blood on it, she says. Not fresh. You thank her. She shrugs. Don't get used to it. The food is, at best, edible. The stew is thick with overcooked vegetables and shreds of something stringy that your jaw resents. The bread is hard enough to chip teeth. A jug of ale is passed around, thin and sour. A rat darts across the floor and nobody flinches. It's not so much a meal as a negotiation between hunger and despair. But the conversation, that's where it gets interesting. Roasted eel, one of the women says, poking the meat with. A knife. That's what they say it is. But I heard the butcher got caught selling horse meat 2 weeks ago, and last night's tasted too much like something that had hooves. Could be dog, someone else offers. Could be priest, someone mutters from the end of the table. Laughter bubbles up fast and sharp. Dark humour, the kind that fills the cracks when dignity leaks out. Historical truth. The food in medieval brothels was often the lowest of the low. Whatever couldn't be sold at market. Bruised produce, spoiled cuts, stale bread was sold cheap to places like this. Some brothels had arrangements with local vendors for regular scraps. Others scavenged. If a worker didn't make enough that night, she might not eat at all. And when winter came and the streets froze, sometimes even stew went off the menu. And yet, food still mattered. It was one of the only comforts left. Hot stew might taste like mop water, but it was better than nothing. Bread soaked in broth could fill a belly just long enough to fake a smile for the next client. Hunger here was a constant companion. The trick was not letting it show. Tonight's oddball fact. Some brothels had their own herb gardens, not for flavour, but to hide the stink. Parsley, sage and thyme were thrown into pots not to season the meat, but to make it smell less like something that should have been buried. In fact, brothel pot was a common term for a haphazard mix of herbs, bones and questionable cuts cooked, until the scent stopped raising questions. There's a low conversation at the end of the table. A young worker, barely 16, is asking an older one if the bruises on her ribs should still be green. She lifts her shirt just slightly, enough to show a yellowing bloom of injury. The older woman says nothing, just offers her a slice of onion and a swig of ale. That'll help, she says, or distract. You wonder how many meals like this they've shared, how many wounds have been dressed with garlic and forgetfulness. No one seems surprised. No one asks who did it. There's another debate bubbling at the far end of the table about whether or not a particular customer should be blacklisted. He brings sweetmeats, one girl says, mouthful. He's harmless. Another shakes her head. He pinched my throat last week, called it play. I nearly passed out. The table goes quiet. Then Lisa speaks up. He's out, she says, just like that. No argument. The authority in her voice is enough. They return to eating. This is how it works. Rules passed over bad meat and candle stubs. No formal votes, just a collective sense of survival. If one girl falls, the rest notice. If someone dangerous gets through, it's remembered. You ask what happens if the bad ones come back anyway. They always do, Lisa replies, but we change how we smile at them. That's the only weapon we've got. It's easy to overlook how much gets decided in rooms, like this, where food is scraped into bowls and power dynamics get shuffled between bites. The madame might control the house, but the women control the rhythm. They know who to warn, who to avoid, who to steer toward the girl with stronger arms and thicker skin. And they share too. Bits of turnip, last scraps of stew, the unburned corner of a biscuit. There's a silent economy among them, one made of favours and nods and half smiles. Someone gives up her seat for a girl who's limping. Another swaps her clean kerchief for one spotted with blood. None of it is spoken, but it's loud. You glance around and realise most of the laughter here doesn't touch anyone's eyes. It's all armour. The food's terrible, the air's close, and the cat's back under the table licking something sticky. But for a brief moment everyone's gathered. Fed, at least partly. Alive. Barely. There's a single candle in the middle of the table, guttering in a pool of wax. One girl lights a second and sticks it in a turnip like a makeshift holder. It sputters but holds. Someone sings a snatch of a song, off-key, melancholy. The lyrics are about a sailor, or maybe a soldier, who promised to return and didn't. It drifts into silence. You push your bowl away and realise you've eaten everything. You're not sure what it was, but it was warm, and right now, that's enough. When the meal ends, the dishes are cleared with mechanical efficiency. One girl washes, another dries, a third sweeps the crumbs into a bin meant for the pigs or the rats, or whoever gets there first. Lisa pats your shoulder as she passes. You didn't die, she says. Not everyone manages that. You smile, or try to. Dinner is over. The real work resumes. But somewhere in your belly, beneath the questionable meat and vinegar ale, there's a new understanding. Hunger isn't just physical here. It's emotional, spiritual, a desperate need for safety, for dignity, for something hot and whole. And in this house, a bowl of stew, whatever it's made from, is the closest thing to grace you're going to get. By morning, the hypocrisy sets in like fog rolling over cobblestones. You can feel it in the way the shutters slam closed, in how the curtains are pulled tight around beds still damp with sweat and secrets. The brothel shifts from its raucous nighttime bloom to something quieter, darker even in daylight, because now, with the sun peeking over the rooftops, it's no longer fun, it's illegal, just like that. You linger near the entrance and watch through a slit in the door as the city outside begins its daily charade. Merchants open stalls, church bells toll, housewives hurry past with baskets and avoid looking directly at the building you're in, the same house they pretended not to visit last night. You see one man step out of the alley next door, adjusting his collar and walking quickly into the daylight like he's being pursued by shame itself. He was here for hours. Now he's just another upstanding citizen again. Inside, the workers move like ghosts. No makeup, no performance, just tired limbs and raw skin. Annis is at her desk, tallying, always tallying. A long, narrow sheet of parchment stretches across her workspace with names, numbers, and small marks you don't recognise. She doesn't look up. "We're not open," she mutters. "But I suppose you're not really a customer, are you?" "Not really," she sighs. "Give it a minute." The collector comes soon. You ask what that means, and she gives you a tight smile. You'll see. You do. About 20 minutes later, a man arrives wearing a cloak trimmed in fox fur and a face full of bureaucratic indifference. His boots are clean, too clean, and his fingers are stained with ink. He doesn't knock, just walks in like he owns the place. Anis meets him at the threshold with a pouch of coins. He doesn't count it, just weighs it in his palm, nods and leaves. That's the collector. He works for the city. And no, this brothel isn't exactly legal, but it isn't illegal either. It exists in that foggy grey purgatory where the law squints and counts its bribes while pretending to enforce morality. Here's your historical fact for this round. In many medieval cities, brothels were technically forbidden but functionally permitted. They operated openly in designated areas, usually near rivers, walls or trade routes, and paid regular fines to city officials. These weren't taxes, not officially. They were moral fees. A nod from the state that said, "We condemn this, but also please give us 10% of your earnings." In London, the Suffolk stews were famously taxed and regulated by the bishop. In Toulouse, city guards were paid to patrol the brothels, not to shut them down, but to make sure they didn't get too rowdy. The church ranted, the city smiled, and the brothel paid both. And now, for your weird fringe fact, some cities issued brothel licenses that were almost comically detailed. They specified everything from the number of beds allowed to the colour of the curtains to the exact volume of ale that could be served. One such document from 15th century Nuremberg even demanded that all workers be examined by a midwife once a week, and that violators would be fined the equivalent of 2 chickens. Bureaucracy at its most bizarre. Of course, none of this kept brothels safe. You ask Anis what happens if someone forgets to pay the collector. She doesn't answer right away. Instead, she pulls out a narrow ledger and flips to a page marked with a red wax seal. "That one didn't pay," she says, tapping a name. "They padlocked her doors, took all her linens. Workers got tossed onto the street." She pauses. 2 of them died that winter. One sold her teeth to a tanner. You sit with that for a while. The hypocrisy runs deep. By day, the brothel is officially condemned. Its residents are branded immoral, impure, dangerous. But by night, the city relies on them to absorb the excesses of its men, to keep peace in the streets, to generate quiet income. It's a shadow tax system, a soft form of city-sanctioned exploitation. And everyone plays along. The guards that patrol outside, they don't interfere unless someone complains. The church only throws a fit during Lent. Even the local butcher gives discounts to brothels because, in his words, God knows you lot feed half the neighbourhood. He delivers wrapped cuts early in the morning, face downcast, hat pulled low. There's an unspoken understanding. Brothels make the city work. You sit at a table with 2 women, Marie and Helda, who are sorting coins by size and smell. Yes, smell. Some are coated in something sticky. One reeks of garlic. Another has blood dried into the grooves. Helda flicks that one aside with a grimace. "Half of these were tossed at us mid-act," she says. "Sometimes they miss." Marie chuckles. "Had a man last week who tried to pay me in cloves. Thought it was romantic. I nearly threw them in his eye." You ask what happens if a customer doesn't pay at all. "Depends," says Helda. "If he's rich, Anis makes a note, keeps a record, waits for the right time. If he's poor, we take his shoes." They're not kidding. There's a basket of shoes by the fire. None matching. All stolen payment. Back near the window, a younger girl named Fran is sewing a rip in her only skirt. She's humming softly, and beside her sits a bucket labelled City Fines. You look inside. It's full. "Some nights," Anis says behind you, "I think we pay more taxes than the bakers." You ask if they ever complain. She laughs. "To who?" "The men who come here. The priests who pay in candles and pretend it's penance. The watchmen who'd rather take a bribe than break up a fight. There's no appeal, no courtroom drama. Just the unshakable bureaucracy of public shame balanced against private greed. And here's your scholarly debate of the day. Did legalised brothels improve the lives of the women who worked there, or just make it easier to exploit them? Some say regulation meant safety, guards, inspectors, rules. Others argue it institutionalised abuse, made exploitation invisible by giving it a ledger and a seal. The answer, as always, is that it depended on your madam, your city, your luck, and your ability to survive. By mid-morning, the house quiets again. The shutters stay drawn. Most of the girls are sleeping. The coins are counted, the scraps hidden, the books closed. Outside, the city pretends not to see. Inside, the brothel pretends not to care. But between the silence and the soot, you start to realise just how much of this place's survival depends on pretending. Pretending they're respectable. Pretending they're invisible. Pretending the law works one way in daylight and another after dusk. And you pretend you're only here, to observe. But even you are starting to understand. Everyone pays, one way or another. The money never leaves your side, not really. It's in your breath, your bones, your heartbeat. Even if your purse is empty, the idea of debt hangs on you like a second shirt, sweaty and unrelenting. You're not in the brothel 2 minutes before you notice it again. How every conversation comes with a price, every favour coils back into a tab. Nothing's forgotten, especially not what you owe. Today you notice the mood is different, tenser, if that's possible. There's less laughter, fewer clever retorts, more side glances and muttered exchanges. At first, you think it's just the hangover of another too long night. But then you spot Anis pacing, lips thin, brow drawn. She's doing math under her breath. Never a good sign. Someone didn't pay, you ask, because you haven't learned to stop poking the bear. Anis stops mid-step, turns, and looks at you like you just offered to solve the problem. Try 6 someones, she mutters. And we're low on lye soap, which means the laundry girl's threatening mutiny. Also, the candle merchant doubled his price. Claims bees are dying. Bees? You raise your eyebrows. What happens now? Now? She gestures toward the door. Now I send Dobbins. Ah, yes. Dobbins. You've heard of him. Spoken of in whispers, with a sort of respect usually reserved for executioners or taxmen. And right on cue he appears, emerging from a back hallway like a spectre in boots, too clean for someone who handles broken knees for a living. He's huge, bald, and carries a short club at his belt. Not for fighting per se, just reminding. List, he grunts. Anis hands him a folded parchment and off he goes. No theatrics, no announcements. Just steady footsteps and an unshakable sense that someone, somewhere, is about to have a very bad day. You sit back and ask one of the girls, Ginny from the other night, how it all works. She snorts. The money doesn't come to us first, that's for sure. Turns out everything here runs on a brutal, carefully managed debt system. The workers owe the house for their clothes, their rooms, their meals, even their soap and candles. Some owe for medicine, others for training, which apparently includes a half-hour lecture and a slap. And when the money from clients comes in, a cut goes to the house first. What's left, if anything, goes to the girl. If she's lucky, if not, it just adds to the ledger. It's like being paid in water, Ginny says. By the time it reaches your hands, it's gone. And this isn't just metaphorical. There's a literal ledger, heavy, iron-bound, and kept behind Anis's desk like a weapon. Every worker's name is in it. Every coin owed, every item borrowed, every extra slice of bread or cracked comb. Some pages are more ink than parchment. Tonight's historical reality, debt was one of the most effective control tools in medieval brothels. Workers often began with a debt they couldn't pay off, either owed to the madam, the city, or even to pimps or middlemen who delivered them to the house. That debt compounded quickly. Interest was rarely fixed. Terms were never fair. A single missed payment could mean an extra week in the worst room or losing your spot entirely. No money meant no bed. No bed meant the alley. Fringe fact of the night. In some cities, brothels issued physical debt tokens, small metal or wooden markers marked with the amount owed. Workers carried them like shameful coins, exchanging them for food or favours. They were sometimes worn on a cord around the neck so that everyone, clients, staff, even other workers, knew exactly how far someone had sunk. Ginny leans back, scratches a scab on her arm and asks, "You ever hear of laying the debt on your back?" You shake your head. It means you work it off, night after night. No pay, just work. And if you don't make your quota, they say your back must not be trying hard enough. She spits into the fire. It's a joke, a bad one. She explains that a few girls are perpetually in debt. Some arrived that way. Others racked it up with injuries, illnesses, or just bad luck. One woman, Lena, broke a toe and couldn't work for 2 weeks. She's still paying it off months later. Another, Marjorie, the one with the limp, has had her debt restructured 5 times. Each restructuring just makes it worse. You ask why they stay. Ginny's smile fades. Because the streets are worse. because we still eat here, because someone would find us if we ran, and because Anis, for all her cold math, is better than the men outside who'd rent our teeth one by one. That's when you realise debt isn't just about money, it's about ownership. The girls owe the house, so the house keeps them. The city allows it because the house keeps the girls off the street and the men entertained. Everyone wins, except, of course, the girls. You ask Anis later if she ever forgives debts. Occasionally, she says without looking up from her books. If someone's dying, or gone, or useful enough to keep around. And sometimes, she adds, I lie and say it's forgiven, but I keep the mark in the book, in case they need reminding. Cold? Yes. But not surprising. Tonight's scholarly argument. Were these debt chains enforced by law or just by culture? Some legal codes barred outright slavery but allowed contractual servitude. Others turned a blind eye, especially if the brothel paid its taxes. But even when the law technically offered freedom, the stigma, poverty and fear ensured that very few ever reached it. The ledger was more powerful than any lock. As night falls, Dobbins returns, his coat dusted with road and blood. He hands Anis a pouch heavier than the one she gave him. She doesn't ask questions, just adds a mark to a name. And, upstairs, Ginny lies down on a mattress that smells like mildew and defeat, clutching a copper coin that she'll use to pay for bread tomorrow. It's not enough to dent her debt, of course, but it will keep her off the worst list, for now. Downstairs the fire crackles, the book closes, and you wonder, not for the first time, how anyone in this place ever manages to leave. Because the truth is simple, they don't. The knock comes just after dawn. 3 sharp raps, loud, precise, and unmistakably official. The kind of knock that isn't asking permission but announcing intrusion. You're in the main room, half asleep in a rickety chair, your head lolling forward and your feet aching from what must be your 14th hour upright. The sound wakes you like a cold slap. Anis is up before the 3rd knock. She's already halfway to the door, laces half-tied, sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her face is expressionless, just a hint of steel in the eyes. She doesn't bother to yell for the others. They already know. A few workers scatter from the room. Some vanish up the stairs. One slips out the back without a sound. Another drops a cloth over the ledger, smooths it out with shaking hands and retreats to the shadows. It's not panic exactly, it's practiced. Routine. The kind of readiness that only comes from having lived through this before. Anis opens the door. There are 4 of them. 2 city guards dressed in chainmail with the faint stink of authority and wine. A clerk in a woolen robe, nose too sharp for his face, ink stains on his fingers. And behind them, a figure in black. A magistrate, you think, or maybe just someone important enough to hide behind vague titles and heavy cloaks. His boots are spotless. His eyes are dead. We're here to inspect, the lead guard says, though it's clearly not a question. Anis steps aside. Of course, she says, voice flat. The house is yours. That's the worst part. It is. They don't need a warrant. Not here. Not for a brothel. The laws governing these places are just vague enough to give anyone with a badge or seal the right to enter, to search, to question. Technically, it's for public health and moral order. In reality, it's about power. About reminding the women who's really in charge. The guards move fast like they've done this before. One starts checking the sleeping quarters, pulling sheets off beds, sniffing at jars, lifting skirts hung to dry like he's hunting for secrets sewn into the seams. Another heads for the storage room and begins opening crates, knocking aside candles, rifling through ledgers. You wince when he lifts the one Anis tried to hide. The clerk stands in the centre of the room, scribbling notes, eyes darting from face to face. He asks questions. How many workers, any illnesses, any new arrivals without license? The words fall like stones. The answers come short and clipped. Here's your cold historical reality. While many cities officially permitted brothels, they still raided them, often at random, often under the pretense of enforcing rules no one could quite define. The goal wasn't usually to shut the place down. It was to collect fines, exert control, and remind everyone that tolerance didn't mean safety. Legal didn't mean protected, it just meant traceable. And tonight's bizarre little fringe fact. In some medieval cities, a raiding official would literally sniff women's breath to test for sin. No joke. They believed certain odours, lustful miasmas, were detectable. If your breath was too sour or your skin too warm, You might be labelled too diseased to serve. Naturally, these accusations came with fines. Science, medieval style. The magistrate steps forward now, hands clasped behind his back. He doesn't say a word for several long moments, just looks at the cracked walls, the flickering lanterns, the women, now gathered near the far wall, arms crossed or hanging loose, heads high or tilted low depending on how many raids they've lived through. Then he speaks. "You've exceeded your capacity." Anis stiffens. "By one. We took in a girl who was turned out by Southgate. She has nowhere else." "Then she can leave now," he replies. "You don't know who this girl is. Maybe she's hiding upstairs. Maybe she's already slipped out. But you feel the tension ripple through the room like a string pulled too tight. Anis doesn't move, doesn't argue. Also, the magistrate adds, your accounts are overdue. 3 weeks. "I submitted payment last Thursday," Anis says. "Yes," he agrees, eyes cold. "But you didn't include the sanitation tithe, or the silence stipend." You blink. Silence stipend? It's not made up. Some city officials invented fines as they went. Fees for continued operation, for failing to control noise, for not reporting the excessive moaning of clients, for, seriously, shameful gutter leakage. They were never consistent, just whatever sounded legitimate enough to justify a seizure. Scholars still argue about whether these fees were part of an organised protection racket or just opportunistic corruption. Probably both. Either way, the result was the same, a constant economic noose, tightening 1 inch at a time. "I'll have it by next week," Anis says. "You'll have it by dawn tomorrow," the magistrate replies. With that, the raid ends. They don't destroy anything. They don't arrest anyone. That's not the point. The point was showing up, making the house tremble, making the women remember their place on the city's ladder, somewhere below cobbler apprentices and just above swineherds. As the door closes behind them, the room stays quiet for a long time. Eventually, someone exhales. "That wasn't so bad," one of the women says. Anis says nothing. She just walks to her desk, reopens the ledger and starts writing. You step outside needing air and find yourself in the alley where the refuse gets dumped. It smells like everything you've ever feared. A girl squats near a bucket, wiping blood from her thigh. She doesn't look up. The city is waking. Carts rumble by, vendors set up, children run past, laughing. No one looks at the brothel. By noon, the raid will be forgotten. By dusk, men will return, but the fines will stay, the fear will stay. And tomorrow, if the money isn't there, the house might not be either. The house is still tense the next day, like it's holding its breath and waiting for the magistrate to return. Everyone moves a little more quietly, talks a little less. Anis is even paler than usual, and you can see the calculation in her eyes, running numbers, weighing options, probably deciding what she can afford to sell or who she can't afford to lose. But in the corners, between the candle shadows and soot-streaked walls, something else is happening too. Something you didn't expect. You see it first with Rosa, the oldest of the women here, though no one says exactly how old. She wears her years like armour, tight braid, knuckles thickened from work, voice deep from smoke and biting laughter. But this morning she's sitting by the window with a child's Primère in her lap, the kind a noble tutor might use to teach their lordling the alphabet. And she's sounding out letters softly, one finger tracing over the words. Ah, b, k. You sit nearby, careful not to intrude. Rosa glances up and raises an eyebrow. What? You thought I didn't have time to learn? You shake your head. I didn't think anyone had time here, she snorts. That's the trick, isn't it? You take it, steal it, right from under their noses. She points at the tiny book. Stolen from a client. Didn't notice it missing until he was halfway home. Too embarrassed to come back for it. She doesn't say why she's learning. Doesn't need to. In this place, knowledge is a kind of rebellion. It opens your eyes. Once you start looking, you see more of it. These flickers of private life, stolen from the wreckage. Claire mending a pair of boots that aren't hers, needle flashing with careful precision. Lisa sketching flowers into the soot on the wall when no one's watching. Bet reciting a poem under her breath while scrubbing the floor. Not one of those dirty ballads they toss around downstairs, but something with rhythm and weight. And letters. You see letters. Folded slips of parchment, tucked into bodices and laced boots, handed from worker to worker like sacred relics. Some are love notes, you think, some awkward, some clumsy, some with more longing than sense. Others are updates from sisters, from cousins, from children stashed with relatives in far-off towns. You even hear whispers of a girl who writes under a fake name to a soldier at the front, telling him stories that keep him sane. He writes back, always with a pressed flower folded inside. One letter is passed from hand to hand like treasure. It's from a woman who used to work here, Agnes, who saved enough to leave. She's in Bruges now, has a job sewing buttons and sends what little she can back, along with a promise. Someday I'll come back for you. No one laughs at that. They just read it again. Tonight's historical truth. Brothel workers were often more literate than you'd think, especially in larger cities, where education filtered into the lower classes more than we like to admit. Some women had learned to read before they arrived. Others were taught by clients, by lovers, or by each other. Literacy was rare, but it wasn't non-existent. And in places like this, it became a kind of lifeline. Reading meant letters. Letters meant connection. Connection meant hope. Here's your quirky detail. There are records of brothels keeping hidden libraries. Not shelves of books, exactly, but collections of useful texts. Old prayer books, song scrolls, handwritten recipes, herbal guides, even etiquette manuals. These were passed quietly, copied when possible, and guarded like gold. A girl with a book was dangerous. A girl with two was unstoppable. The scholarly debate, it still rages. Some argue these glimpses of literacy were rare flukes, exceptions, not the rule. Others believe we've underestimated just how many women like Rosa carved out intellectual lives behind closed doors. There's growing evidence that brothel workers wrote poetry, kept journals, even copied out legal codes to understand their rights. Whether they were heard or not, they had voices. Back in the main room, you see a different kind of secret. Joy. A few women are braiding each other's hair, passing around a broken mirror and a pot of rouge with barely anything left in it. They're talking nonsense. Jokes about a client who fell asleep mid-kiss, about how the baker's new apprentice looks like a turnip in a tunic. It's silly and loud and alive. Laughter here isn't just a coping mechanism, it's resistance. It's a statement. You haven't broken us yet. Upstairs, someone is playing a song on a tiny harp with only 4 working strings. It sounds terrible and lovely all at once. Below, a girl reads aloud from a letter with terrible grammar and even worse spelling. Everyone listens like it's scripture. You talk to Yvette, one of the quieter workers. You've barely heard her voice in all the days you've spent here, but today she's stitching lace onto a bit of fabric and humming something soft. You ask her what it is. A lullaby, she says. My mother sang it when we slept in the hayloft. I forgot the words, so I made new ones. You nod. Do you sing it for the clients? She shrugs. Only the ones who cry. Later, you find Bet in the back, lighting a candle beneath a soot-dusted icon of St. Barbara, the patron of those trapped in towers. The match sputters, the wax is low, but the flame holds. You ask what she's praying for. Quiet, she says. Not peace, not escape. Just quiet. A moment without fear, a day without bruises, a night without debt. Nothing grand, just one still breath in a world of storm. That's the thing no one tells you. The people in these places aren't hollow. They aren't dead-eyed props in someone else's tragedy. They live full lives in the margins, in seconds, in sentences. They carve out meaning with whatever tools they have. Laughter, letters, lullabies. And yes, sometimes that's all swept away by violence, by disease, by the weight of the world bearing down on skin that never gets to rest. But not today. Today, Rosa sounds out her letters. Bet lights her candle. Yvette stitches hope into a scrap of lace. And somewhere, a soldier reads a letter in Bruges, smelling the pressed flower inside and thinking of a girl who told him once that she believed in him, even if no one else did. This place is not just flesh and coin and sorrow, it's also stories. And if you're lucky enough to listen, you'll carry some of them with you. Even if you can't save anyone, at least you'll remember. You don't recognise him at first. He doesn't dress like royalty. No gleaming buttons or gold-braided sleeves, no trumpet fanfare to herald his arrival. Just a dark cloak, travel-stained boots, and a hood pulled low. Like every other man who walks through this door pretending not to be someone important. But the way the room changes tells you everything you need to know. The girls freeze just for a breath. Anis looks up from her desk and immediately straightens her posture. Two of the older workers trade a look and disappear without a word, their exit too quick, too smooth to be anything but rehearsed. A whisper passes across the floor, and before long someone mutters it aloud. "The prince is here." Well, that's unexpected. He walks with purpose, not arrogance. There's something practiced about his anonymity, the way he keeps his hands tucked into his sleeves, the way he doesn't look too long at anyone. You notice how his eyes flick to the darkest corners of the room, how he notes every exit. This is a man used to being watched, and hiding anyway. You ask one of the girls softly, "Which prince?" She shrugs. "One of them. Third son, maybe? Fifth? He doesn't use a name." And of course he doesn't. Men like him don't need names here. Their coin does the talking. Their titles, their family crests, their public reputations, they all vanish the moment they cross the threshold. What remains is the appetite, the need, the ache that can't be soothed in court or church or battle. He's not here for spectacle. He's here for something private, something quiet. He gestures to Anis, who nods once, then turns to select a girl from the edge of the room. Not the youngest, not the flashiest, but one of the ones who never asks questions. Her name is Aline. She stands, smooths her skirts, and follows him, up the stairs without looking back. This is not unusual. Royal visitors are rare, but not unheard of. They come cloaked, always, and they don't announce themselves. They pick girls who won't talk, leave quietly, and pretend it never happened. In some cities, the brothels even keep special rooms for them. Cleaner sheets, better wine, curtains that actually close. Tonight's historical reality. Royal and noble men regularly frequented brothels in the Middle Ages. Despite public condemnations from the church and occasional half-hearted crackdowns, brothels were considered a safer alternative to illicit affairs with married noblewomen. Less scandal, more control. Kings, dukes, even bishops used them as a release valve. Some brought their own servants and security. Others, like tonight's prince, came alone, swaddled in secrecy. Sometimes they came with requests. Sometimes they came with warnings. You learn that this particular man has been here before, that he prefers silence, dim candlelight, and for the girl not to speak unless spoken to. He pays double for discretion, triple if there's a festival nearby and he might be seen. There are stories of other girls, other nights, bruises that couldn't be explained or could be, but weren't. No one speaks ill of him, not aloud, not because they like him, but because they know better. Tonight's fringe fact. There are records of nobles gifting jewellery or land to their favourite brothel workers. Some women left the profession with titles, manors, even servants of their own, but those were rare. More often, royal visits left behind secrets, pregnancies or disasters. A prince's favour could be a blessing or a curse. Some brothels kept quiet logs of powerful clients written in code. Others burned the sheets as soon as the door closed. The debate among historians: were royal clients protected because of who they were, or because the brothels needed them to survive? Some argue the brothels depended on powerful patrons to keep officials at bay. Others suggest the influence went both ways, that women in these places held blackmail-level secrets that could shake kingdoms and used them, carefully, quietly, only when absolutely necessary. You climb the stairs slowly, heart thudding, and pause outside the door where the prince disappeared. You hear nothing, not laughter, not speech, just the faint creak of floorboards and the rustle of fabric. Downstairs, Anis is watching the door, ledger closed but fingers twitching like she's still writing. She doesn't ask what you heard, she just says, "He leaves before sunrise." No one speaks to him, not even you. You don't argue. Time passes, the fire burns low. Aline returns first, walking softly, her face unreadable. She doesn't speak. She doesn't go to the kitchen or her room. She just sits at the hearth and stares into the coals, arms wrapped around herself like she's holding her breath. You want to say something, but what could you say? The prince follows minutes later, hood up, boots quiet. He slips out the side door like smoke through a crack. Gone. Anis walks over and stands beside Aline. Doesn't touch her, doesn't speak, just stands. And then, eventually, Aline rises, walks into the washroom, closes the door. No one asks questions. Later that night, you sit beside Rosa, and she tells you a story. Not about this prince, about another one. Years ago. He came drunk, she says, stumbled in shouting about destiny and crowns and war, said he wanted to feel like a real man before he went off to battle, so I took him upstairs, told him I was a princess cursed by a witch, told him he could break the curse if he kissed my feet. You raise your eyebrows. He did, she grins, her eyes gleaming. He cried afterward. What happened to him? She shrugs. He died in a war, or became king. Same difference. You laugh, but it dies quickly. Because even in that story, she never had power, just the illusion of it, just enough to get through the night. That's how it always works here. Kings and queens of dust and dreams, rulers of hours, pretenders to comfort, and in the end they all leave, except the women who can't. So when a prince walks through a brothel's door, cloaked and quiet, remember, he's not here because he's brave. He's here because this is the one place no one will call him by name, and he'll pay dearly for that silence. But the girl he visits, she pays more. You notice it one night in the way the girls lean closer together near the fire, heads tilted not in gossip but in something more deliberate. A circle has formed, not for warmth, though the room is bitter with cold, but for purpose. There's a cloth stretched out between them, stained and creased, and at the centre of it sits a small bundle of dried herbs, a dish of oil, a scrap of parchment, and something that smells suspiciously like burnt cinnamon. Claire lights a bit of twine from the fire and holds it steady over the bundle. The flame dances, flickers, then vanishes with a hiss as it touches the herbs. A thin stream of smoke curls upward, swirling into the dim air, and everyone in the circle closes their eyes. "What are you doing?" you whisper. "Quiet," Bet says. "It's a binding." You stay quiet. After a few breaths, Claire mutters something low in a language you don't know. It might be Latin, might be Breton, might be made up. The smoke thickens. The women stay still. Ginny drops something into the dish. A bead, or maybe a tooth. It lands with a quiet click. "Now it's done," Claire says, wiping her hands on her apron. "If he comes back, he'll limp." That's when you understand. The ritual wasn't for healing. It was for revenge. And here, in this place where justice rarely sets foot, that kind of magic might be the only weapon left. Medieval brothels weren't just centres of commerce and suffering. They were repositories of superstition. Places where belief clung to every corner, tucked into floorboards and sewn into bodices. You learn quickly that the women here have charms for everything. Protection, fertility, silence, luck, health. Most of them are little things. Bundles of twine, salt sprinkled behind doors, herbs hung from rafters, but all of them matter. You spot a dried sprig of rue nailed above the hearth, a thimble of iron in a girl's shoe, a red thread tied around Rosa's wrist. These aren't accidents. These are spells, however quiet. Historical reality. Magic and medicine were often the same thing in the Middle Ages, especially for women. In brothels, where disease and danger were part of the job, workers turned to whatever remedies they could find. That meant folk healers, midwives, travelling peddlers, and old books filled with charms and potions copied down by candlelight. Some were based in herbal knowledge, others were pure hope. You ask Wren, the half-blind healer, how much of it works. "Depends on the person," she says, crushing rosemary in a mortar. "Some folks just need to believe the ache's gone. Others need the ache to leave with a scream and a bloodletting. Who am I to say which is better?" She hands you a small pouch. "Hang this near your bed. Keeps the nightmares off your chest." You look inside. It's filled with lavender, fennel seeds, and something dry and crumbly that might once have been part of a frog. You thank her anyway. Tonight's strange but true fact. Some brothels employed wise women or part-time witches who provided more than just medical help. They sold potions for beauty, brews to strengthen affection, and even charms for clients hoping to win favour or increase performance. These women existed in a precarious space, respected, feared, and often accused of sorcery when things went wrong. There are recorded trials of brothel workers who doubled as herbalists, later accused of witchcraft when a customer died or went mad. In more than a few cases, the very women who offered healing were dragged to the gallows by men who once paid for their salves. You start to notice the language of magic everywhere. The way Claire marks her room's threshold with soot. The way Anis knocks twice on her ledger before opening it. The whispered prayers spoken into cups before drinking. They may not call it spell work, but it is. And then there's the medicine, if you can call it that. Wren brews potions with wild plants, boiled honey, garlic, and things you don't want to name. Her remedies treat coughs, blood flow, infections, nightmares, love, lust, and broken pride. Some work, others, let's say they're more experimental. You meet Tilda, a girl who swears by a tonic of vinegar and crushed oyster shells to ward off the burning. Another uses a salve made from lard and powdered iron for bruises. Ginny keeps a dried beetle in a locket. She says it protects her from men who hit. So far she's still, standing, so maybe she's right. The scholarly argument of the night: were these rituals and potions legitimate healthcare, or just the desperate flailing of people with no better options? Historians debate whether medieval brothel magic was rooted in functional herbalism or cultural fantasy. The truth again is messier. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. But all of it was an act of control in a world that offered none. You sit with the women that evening as they prepare another ritual, this time for luck. They pass around a ribbon, each tying a knot into it while whispering wishes. Rosa wishes for a warm winter. Bet wishes for quiet clients. Yvette doesn't say her wish aloud, just bites her lip and knots the thread with trembling fingers. Then they tie the ribbon to the back of a chair. That's it. No grand gestures, no thunder, just a line of hope, knotted and waiting. Later you find a bundle of herbs under your own pillow. You don't ask how it got there. You don't need to. Because in a place like this, magic is a kind of protest. It says, I refuse to die without fighting. It says, I may not control the law, the ledger, or the coin, but I can still cast a spell with rosemary and salt and a thread wrapped around my wrist. It says, I'm still here. And maybe, just maybe, that's powerful enough. Stories carry farther in a brothel than they do in taverns, temples, or courts. They slide through floorboards and seep into bedding, passed from girl to girl with a wink or a shudder. Most are half true, bent by memory and wine. But a few ring too vivid to be fiction. You hear your first over breakfast, which is, surprise, turnip stew again. Bet's chewing slowly and speaking fast, eyes gleaming as she tells the new girl, Els, about the House of Swans, a legendary brothel tucked behind Silk Merchant's estate outside Paris. Only took clients with titles, Bet says. Had marble floors and silk sheets changed every night. They say the madam once turned away a duke for smelling like sheep. Els snorts. How would you know? I danced there, Bet lies effortlessly, for a week, until a count got handsy and I cracked his nose with my shoe. The girls laugh, even if they don't believe it. They need stories like this. Stories of places where the work was easier, where the women were treated like queens, not coin boxes. You find out later that the House of Swans did exist, though the part about marble floors is likely creative liberty. Still, it's part of brothel folklore now. It's real because enough people want it to be. Anis confirms it in passing. Place shut down 10 years ago. Fire or scandal? Probably both. That's how many of these legends end. In ash? But not all. Some persist. The Golden Window, for example. A brothel in Venice built on a canal, its workers posing by candlelight behind gilded lattice so boatmen could shop from the water. Or the Singing Bell, in Prague, where girls performed operettas between visits and one allegedly stabbed a noble with a harpsichord string. And then there's the Crimson Cloister, perhaps the most infamous of all. Supposedly run by a former nun turned madam, the cloister was said to house women who had once taken holy vows, now offering absolution of a more carnal sort. It's probably a myth, but everyone in this house swears their aunt's cousin's mistress once worked there. Historical reality, many famous brothels from the medieval period left behind more legend than record. The ones in major trade cities, Florence, Bruges, Avignon, were often larger, better appointed, and employed dozens of workers. They sometimes had contracts, guards, even official patrons, and yes, some were known for extravagant themes. One brothel in Rome was styled like a miniature castle, complete with banners and fake battlements. Another in London had its walls painted with biblical scenes, which was probably less ironic than it sounds. These houses weren't safer necessarily, but they were richer. And in a world where most workers lived on crusts and scraps, a place with velvet cushions and wine from real grapes became the stuff of dreams. Fringe fact of the evening. In 14th century Vienna, a brothel named the Starling House was rumoured to have its own choir, with workers trained to sing before each appointment. One chronicler even claims they staged full passion plays during Easter week, with clients allowed to watch from balconies. Whether or not this happened, the story lived on in songs and bawdy plays for centuries. It was said that if a man died in the Starling House, his soul got confused and went straight to heaven, assuming he'd been in church. The scholarly debate here centres on what these stories really were. Some say they were aspirational, fairy tales for the desperate. Others argue they were coded warnings, tales of extravagance leading to ruin, warnings about flying too high in a world that prefers its women broken and invisible. You sit at the fire with Claire later and ask her if she ever knew anyone who worked in one of these grand brothels. She nods. A girl named Mirelle said she wore perfume that cost more than our weekly wages, danced for lords, had her own room, a bed with feathers, even had a mirror she didn't have to share. What happened to her? She fell in love with a knight, Claire says flatly, ran off with him. 3 weeks later she came back with no shoes and a cut across her cheek, never said a word. There's a long pause. Then Claire adds, "She left again not long after. Haven't heard since." That's the danger of these places. Not just the violence or disease, but the dreams they leave behind. Dreams of velvet and candlelight, of men who see you as more than a transaction. Dreams that can turn on you faster than a cold wind through an open window. And yet the stories persist, passed around with each sip of weak ale, repeated to newcomers like sacred texts. One girl tells you about a house in Barcelona where all the women wore pearls. Another claims to have heard of a brothel in Bruges that had books, real books, leather-bound, with pictures. Rosa insists there was a place in Marseille where no one worked more than twice a week. That one gets laughter. Sure, Bet snorts, and they all had foot rubs and husbands who didn't snore. Still, no one outright denies the tales, because even in sarcasm there's space for hope. You go to bed that night with one of the stories echoing in your head. Something about a house where the workers wrote their own rules, drank sweet wine, and painted stars on the ceiling so they could dream of more than what waited behind the door. You know it's just a tale, but in this world, sometimes stories are all you have. Winter arrives like an ambush. One day it's just cold, the next it's a siege. The wind howls down the alleyways like it's trying to peel the bricks from the walls, and the river freezes at its edges with a sound like distant thunder. Inside the brothel, every draught feels like an accusation. The air smells of smoke, sour fabric, and too many people clinging to too little warmth. You sleep fully clothed now, everyone does, not for modesty, but for survival. Boots on, skirts doubled, shawls layered so thick the girls look like unravelling dolls. The hearth burns day and night, but it's never enough. The logs are half rotten. The smoke chokes more than it warms. Still, it's better than the alternative. The windows stay shuttered. The walls leak cold like a wound that won't close. And the clients? They don't stop coming. If anything, the winter drives them in faster. Fewer options in the frost. Fewer patrols outside. No one wants to die in the snow with their pants half down behind the bakers. Anis begins rationing firewood, counting candles, assigning warmth like currency. The best rooms, meaning the least freezing, go to the highest earning girls. The others double up, sometimes triple. You see 3 women curled together on a single straw mattress, backs pressed like spoons in a drawer. It's not about comfort, Rosa mutters one night, rubbing her knees. It's about circulation. You learn that frostbite isn't even the first danger. It's infection. Cracked skin that doesn't heal, feet that blister in damp boots, lungs that start to wheeze. The house cough makes its rounds every year like a plague on a schedule. This time, Yvette is the first to fall sick. She's curled on a blanket near the fire, breathing like she's underwater. Wren, the healer, tries everything. Onion poultices, warm milk, even boiling nettle tea laced with something that smells like fermented despair. Nothing works. Yvette shivers and coughs and mutters things in her sleep. She's burning, Wren says, wringing out a cloth, but her hands are like stone. They try to keep her in the warmest spot, but there's only so much heat to go around. Everyone gives a little. Their own space, their own blankets, even a bit of their stew. Anis moves her ledger to the upstairs landing so the hearth can stay crowded. You want a hopeful ending here. You want to say Yvette recovers. She doesn't. She dies on the 3rd night, somewhere between 2 coughs. No drama, no wail, just an exhale that never inhales again. Rosa is the one who notices. She stands, checks her pulse and says simply, "She's gone." No one screams, no one faints, they just sit. You ask what happens now. "Wrap her," Anis says. They do. Historical reality. Winters were brutal for brothel workers, especially those without powerful clients or coin. Cold meant sickness, and sickness meant lost income. Many died not from plague or violence, but from exposure. Brothels often lacked proper insulation. Bedding was shared and seldom washed. Remedies were inconsistent and real physicians refused to treat fallen women. Fringe fact? Some brothels hung meat in the rafters in winter, not just to cure it, but because it insulated the room. The theory went that if the meat didn't rot, the girls wouldn't either. Ridiculous. Maybe. But in desperate houses, superstition passed for science. Now the scholarly argument, did winter mortality in brothels lead to any real change? Some suggest it pushed cities to consider better housing standards for these necessary evils, especially when mortality rates began impacting client numbers. Others believe it simply reinforced the expendability of the workers. A few less mouths to feed, after all. Yvette is buried the next morning. Not in a cemetery, she wasn't entitled to that, but in the dirt behind the tannery wall. Anis pays a boy a halfpenny to dig the hole. Claire weaves a scrap of ribbon into her hair before they lay her down. She liked yellow, she says. No prayers, just silence, and snow. Lots of snow. It doesn't stop, for days. The world turns white and mean. Some of the girls start sleeping in shifts, 4 hours at a time, rotating between the fire and the furthest beds. The stew gets thinner. One night it's just broth and boiled onion skin. Still, no one complains. Not really. Because complaining takes energy, and energy is precious now. Some men offer more money on snowed-in nights. For warmth, for companionship. Others get meaner, harder. You can see it in their eyes, the frost behind their stares, like winter's taken hold of them too. Bet gets slapped across the jaw by a drunk who claims she didn't moan loud enough. Claire kicks him down the stairs. He doesn't come back. Everyone cheers, quietly. Then, in the thick of it, something impossible happens. Anis calls a full house meeting. Everyone gathers, half-frozen, expecting bad news. Another death, a closure, a debt. But she just holds up a small pouch. The gold from the prince, she says. It came. Late, but it came. I'm using it to buy coal and salted meat. No arguments. The room goes quiet. Then slowly, a ripple of relief moves through the crowd. You don't often see joy here. But this is close. The coal arrives 2 days later. Black and bitter and heavy. Enough to fill 3 crates. The girls cheer like children, dragging it inside in their aprons. Someone even sings a hymn. That night, for the first time in weeks, the rooms are warm. Not hot, not cosy. But warm enough that you don't have to sleep in your boots. Warm enough that the coughing stops, even just for one night. And as the snow howls outside, you hear laughter inside. Soft, cracked, genuine. You sit by the fire with the others, holding your hands out to the heat, thinking of Yvette, of the yellow ribbon, of the way death can hang like frost on the rafters, and yet, somehow, life still happens. Not easily, not gently, but stubbornly. Like a flame that won't go out no matter how hard the wind tries. Word count 1104. Awaiting continue. Section 23. By late winter, the brothel takes on a strange, fevered rhythm. Survival has sharpened everyone's senses, each movement calculated, each word measured. There's no room for wasted steps, no appetite for drama unless it's profitable. Every moment of calm feels earned, stolen even, like a stolen loaf cooling behind locked doors. And just as you start to think things have stabilised, the bell rings. No one moves at first. That's what's unsettling. The bell isn't for clients. It's above the side entrance, the one only used for emergencies, deliveries, and visitors who don't want to be seen. Then comes the knock. Not polite, not desperate, just slow, deliberate. 1, 2, 3. Anis is already on her feet, pushing past the girls gathered in the hallway. She opens the door just wide enough to see, then sighs. Get Rosa, she says. You follow without being told, heart pounding harder than it should. Rosa's in the laundry room, hacking ice out of the basin with a flat iron. You deliver the message. Her eyes narrow. Did he bring the sack? She asks. You don't know what that means, but the answer comes soon enough. Back in the main room stands a man you've never seen before. Tall, lean, wearing a hood but no cloak, which tells you two things. He's confident and not here for pleasure. At his feet is a burlap sack. It twitches. The room goes quiet. You can hear the wind outside through the shutters. Rosa, the man says. His voice is smooth, like rain sliding off a blade. Benedict, she answers, and there's so much contempt packed into the name it nearly buckles the walls. He opens the sack. Inside is a girl. 14, maybe younger. Her lip is split. Her cheek is swollen. She blinks against the light like she's just been dug out of the ground. She's yours, Benedict says. You owe me one. Rosa steps forward slowly. We agreed no more orphans. She's not an orphan, he replies, almost cheerfully. Her mother sold her to a barkeep, who sold her to a stable hand, who couldn't pay the debt. I'm just the courier. Anis says nothing. She's already pulled out the ledger. You want to scream. You want someone to stop this. But no one moves. Because this is normal. Because this is business. Historical truth. Girls, especially poor ones, were often sold or forced into brothels by parents, guardians, even clergy. Sometimes they arrived as servants and never left. Others were traded in payment of debts. In many cities laws prohibited this, but only when the girls were respectably born. For the daughters of the poor the laws didn't apply, or rather they were applied selectively. The girl is lifted from the sack by two workers. She doesn't fight, just winces. They carry her upstairs. Rosa watches until she disappears, then turns to Benedict. We're even, she says. We were even before, he replies, then walks out. Anis marks something in her book, and the fire crackles on. You find Rosa later, sitting alone in the washroom, scrubbing the girl's blood from a rag. She doesn't cry. She doesn't speak. She just scrubs. You sit beside her. I was her, she says eventually. Not exactly, but close enough. 11. Came in through the back door. Didn't know how to curse or fake a smile. They said I'd be trained first. You don't ask what that meant. You already know. First girl I met was named Sally. Taught me how to put on rouge without looking like a clown. Gave me a thimble of apple wine and told me to cry in the laundry where no one would hear. You nod. She died 2 months later, kicked in the stomach by a man who thought pain was part of the purchase. That's when Rosa looks up. If that girl lives, it won't be because the world got better. It'll be because I teach her how to outlast it. That's the quiet truth you've started to realise. Brothels weren't just markets. They were training grounds. Not for luxury, not for seduction, but for endurance. Rosa spends the next 2 weeks working with the girl. Her name, you learn, is Miller. She won't speak, won't eat unless coaxed. But Rosa brings her soft bread and tells her stories while washing her hair. Claire stitches her a clean shift. Bet gives her a comb. None of this is about generosity. It's survival logic. You build up the ones who might carry the weight after you fall. One night, you find Miller curled by the hearth, arms wrapped around her knees, watching Rosa braid someone's hair. Her eyes are glassy but focused. Do you want to learn? Rosa asks without looking at her. Miller nods. Later, you watch her braid a piece of yarn, clumsy at first, then better. She says nothing, but she hums. Off-key. Strange. Brave. Fringe fact, some brothels maintained informal sisterhoods. Older workers mentoring younger ones, not out of kindness but necessity. The turnover was brutal. Without someone teaching you how to avoid the worst clients, how to read a man's body language, how to fake pleasure convincingly enough to make him leave quicker, you didn't last. These mentorships weren't soft, but they worked, and that's the academic debate. Were brothels exploitative prisons or survival communities? The truth is both. One didn't cancel out the other. Many women suffered horrific abuse. Many were trapped, and yet, within those walls, systems of care evolved. Covert, coded, often invisible to outsiders. You see it every day now. Rosa showing Miller how to lace her shift. Anis teaching her to count coin by touch, not sight. Claire sharing tricks for avoiding infection. Ginny whispering which guards can be bribed with stew. None of it redeems what happened, but it might save her. One night, the fire's burning low, and Miller sits beside you. She's holding a lump of wax in her hand, something she's carved herself. It's misshapen, crude, but you recognise it immediately. It's a bird, a swan maybe, or a dove. Is it flying? You ask. She nods. Where to? She shrugs, but she's smiling. It's not a riot. Not really. Not at first. It starts as a sound, shouts outside just beyond the alley, voices rising like steam. You hear clanging, something like pots banging together or maybe a hammer against stone. Then glass breaks. Not from your house, not yet, but nearby. A stall? A tavern window? You move to the shutter and peek through. There's a crowd. Not huge, but growing. Men mostly, but not all. Angry, cold, hungry. The kind of people who've spent the winter being ignored and just now realise they're surrounded by others who feel the same. One of them holds a broken torch. Another is yelling about grain prices. Someone else is demanding a bishop's head. You don't know which bishop. Doesn't matter. This is a city on the edge, and the edge is crumbling. Inside, the mood shifts fast. Survival instincts switch on. Anis orders the doors bolted. No clients tonight, she snaps. Anyone outside's not paying, they're taking. You can hear the locks thudding shut, the bar dropped into place on the front door. Rosa's already gathering blankets, pushing the younger girls upstairs. No windows, no noise. Stay down. You ask if this has happened before. Not here, she says, but once in Rans. They burned 3 brothels before the guards even arrived. So now everyone moves fast. The stew is pulled from the fire and hidden in the pantry. Candles are snuffed. Buckets of water are fetched and placed in every corner. The girls grab whatever they can carry. Their combs, their coins, their warmest shawls. It's quiet panic. Swift, practiced, but no less terrifying. Because if the crowd turns this way, you don't stand a chance. Historical fact. Brothels were frequent targets during civil unrest in medieval cities. Sometimes the mob blamed them for moral decay. Sometimes they just saw easy loot and women with no protection. Other times it was religious fervour, a rogue preacher calling for cleansing. But more often it was about rage. Rage at the rich, the powerful, the men who visited these places by night and ruled the streets by day. And the brothel, standing between worlds, was a too easy symbol. The girls huddle in the upstairs hallway. Miller is clinging to Claire. Bet has a knife. Not a big one. But it's sharp and she holds it like someone who's used it before. Rosa stands at the stairwell, arms crossed. If they get in, she says, we don't scream. We scatter. It's a strange kind of helplessness. To be locked inside a house full of trained seductresses and hardened survivors and still know that you're no match for a dozen angry men with torches and not enough to lose. You ask Anis if she's armed. I'm armed with the knowledge that one of them will know me, she says, and I'll use that. There's something disturbingly honest in that. The shouting outside grows louder. You hear a cry of pain, sharp, brief. Then footsteps running past the alley. Then another crash. Somewhere, a building's caught fire. The glow flickers red against the shutters. Everyone goes still. Tonight's fringe fact. In some medieval riots, brothels were spared. Not because of kindness, but because someone in the crowd had a sister or a lover or a favourite girl inside. There are even accounts of rioters forming protective rings around certain houses, shouting down looters who tried to break in. It's chaos logic. The mob hates you until it doesn't. And the scholarly debate? Were brothels victims or collaborators during uprisings? It's murky. Some madams allegedly paid rebel leaders to leave them untouched. Others were accused of sheltering city officials or spies. But most just locked their doors and prayed the walls held. You sit beside Miller in the dark, the smell of sweat and smoke thick in the air. She's clutching her carved bird, not crying, just quiet. Then the sound changes. The shouting moves on. You hear it drifting down the street like a wave retreating. Still loud, still dangerous. But not here, not now. The danger has passed. This time, everyone exhales. Slowly. The fire is rekindled. The windows are checked. No broken glass, no boot prints at the door, no one's missing, no one's hurt, but everyone is shaken. That night, no one sleeps. They sit around the hearth, drinking thin ale and watching the flames like they expect another knock. Rosa wraps Miller in a blanket and tells her a story about a cat who bit a bishop and got canonised for its trouble. Claire hums, Bet sharpens her knife again. Anis counts the coins, always the coins. No one says what they're all thinking. Next time we might not be lucky, but you feel it, hanging in the air. And so, to chase it away, the girls tell stories, real ones, ridiculous ones. Bet says she once faked a faint so well a nobleman paid her not to die. Claire claims she scared off a ghost by reciting market prices. Rosa just rolls her eyes and says, I once loved a man so much I let him see me without rouge. He never came back. The laughter is tired, but it's real. And maybe that's the magic of this place. Not the painted lips or the soft sheets or the rituals whispered in dark corners, but the way they still laugh. The way they survive the unspeakable and still dare to joke about it. You go to bed at dawn, with the embers low and your hands smelling of soot. The streets outside are quiet again. For now. But inside? Inside, something stronger has taken root. Resilience. Not the fairy tale kind. The practical, ugly, glorious kind that doesn't wait for saviours or saints. Just warmth. Just walls. Just each other. And sometimes, that's enough. Morning breaks slow and heavy after the unrest. Like the sun is ashamed of itself. The streets outside the brothel are unusually quiet. You hear distant voices, the squeal of a cartwheel, someone hammering boards over a shattered window. But here in the house, the silence is thicker. Not frightened, not broken, just aware. Everyone's moving a little slower today, like the memory of last night is hanging from their shoulders like a wet cloak. Rosa is first to the fire. She doesn't say anything, just pokes at the coals with a bit of kindling, coaxing them back to life. Claire passes behind her and lays down a pot of water without being asked. It's a routine born not of love, but of repetition, function, habit, the rhythm of survival. You find Alice in the ledger room, hunched over her books, rubbing at her temple with one ink-stained hand. She doesn't look up when you enter. How bad? You ask. She shrugs. We lost a week's worth of bookings last night. 3 girls too shaken to work. The firewood's almost gone again, and the watch captain stopped by this morning to remind me we're still overdue on that unlicensed music fine from Candlemas. You wait. She sighs. So, not the worst day. Perspective. She closes the book. Go wake the girls. We've got visitors coming. Clients? No, she says, standing with a groan. Inspectors. Of course. It's almost comedic, the timing. A night of riots, near death, and now the city decides to show up. A pair of clerks arrive by midday, one wheezing, the other with a smug look and a quill already scratching. They don't even glance at the soot-stained walls or the girls' hollowed cheeks. Just start asking the usual questions. Names, ages, how many rooms are currently functional, any recent illnesses, any suspicious men seen leaving after curfew. Rosa, with the patience of a saint and the temper of a bear, answers politely. Yes, number 5. Not unless you count that one man who kept weeping into his own boot. The clerk doesn't laugh, he just makes a note. And this is how the world continues, even after, almost ending. Historical fact. Post-riot inspections were common in cities that tolerated brothels. Authorities weren't really looking for safety issues. They were looking to reassert control. Order had to be restored, and brothels, being both morally suspect and politically tolerated, made easy targets. Records show fines levied for things like unwashed bedding, unseemly laughter, and failure to maintain separation from chapel grounds. Because of course, proximity to prayer was always more offensive than proximity to starvation. Here's your strange fact for this final lap. Some brothels, in an attempt to seem more reputable after civil unrest, adopted uniforms for their workers. Yes, uniforms. Matching dresses, ribbons, aprons. The idea was to appear more like a business and less like a den of sin. One brothel in Lübeck even required girls to wear city colours on holy days. Naturally, this did little to protect them during actual violence. The scholarly argument here is the final lingering question. Did brothels ever offer long-term escape for the women inside them, or were they always just prettier cages? Some argue that a clever woman, one who saved her coin, found a patron, maybe learned to read, could buy her way out. And some did. They became tavern owners, midwives, even landladies. But many more died in these places, or worse, lived past their usefulness and were turned out without name, coin or teeth. And yet not all who remained were helpless. You see that in what happens next. As the inspectors leave, Rosa gathers the girls. We're rebuilding the upstairs, she says, not waiting for the next frost. I want straw mats under every bed and cloth nailed over every window. Claire, get the needle girls. Bet, take stock of what fabric's left. Miller, you're with me. You're going to learn how to check a man's pulse before he even speaks. No one questions her. The orders move like water. Even Anis steps aside. You see it now, the real hierarchy. The city may own the street. Anis may own the books. But Rosa? Rosa owns the house. And maybe that's what's left when the dust settles. Not some grand epiphany. Not a hero rising from tragedy. But a woman with cracked hands and a louder voice deciding that she's done waiting to be saved. Later that night, the house starts to feel alive again. Not glamorous, not clean, but alive. The rooms are warmer. The food tastes like food again. There's music. Bad, off-key, and wonderful. Someone found a fiddle with only 2 strings, and it sings like a drunk bird. Miller dances with her carved bird in her hand, twirling awkwardly in bare feet. Ginny shouts encouragement. Claire laughs so hard she drops a candle. And you? You sit back and watch the same people who are nearly silenced by frost, by riot, by shame, rise up not with violence but with song. It's not justice, it's not freedom, but it's power, hard-won and imperfect, and maybe that's enough for tonight. Because if you've learned anything, it's this. You wouldn't last a day in a medieval brothel, not because of the filth, or the danger, or the cruelty, but because these women, these stubborn, cunning, beautiful survivors, have built a world inside the walls they were never supposed to outlive, and they've made it their own. So tomorrow, when the city forgets them again, when the bishop preaches against them, when the inspectors return with new fines scribbled in bloodless ink, these women will still be here, braiding each other's hair, marking debts in chalk, lighting candles to saints who never answer, and laughing because they know they're still standing. The fire's burned low now, and even the street dogs outside have stopped howling. The last cup of stew has been scraped clean, the last client long gone, and the brothel is quieter than you've ever heard it. Not silent. No, never truly silent, but quieter. Just the creak of old wood, the distant murmur of someone turning in their sleep, the tiny snap of a cooling hearthstone. You're sitting near the back wall, knees tucked up, feeling the weight of everything that's happened. The laughter, the blood, the frost, the ledger ink that outlasted lives. And above it all, that low, relentless hum of survival, of women living lives they were never meant to, enduring things that would fold most people in half, and doing it with more grace than the world deserves. Someone hands you a cup of weak cider. It's barely more than warm water and apple skin, but the gesture matters. Everything here is a gesture. The way Rosa fluffs Miller's pillow without comment. The way Bet rebraids Ginny's hair even though her own hands are cracked from cold. The way Anis, ledger in her lap, doesn't write anything tonight. You think about all the strange things you've seen. Binding spells whispered over bundles of herbs. Princes with names no one's allowed to speak. Riots that nearly tore the walls down. Coins passed with a glance. Tears swallowed before they could fall. And through it all, the rhythm of the brothel never broke. Bent? Yes. Cracked. Often, but never broken. Because that's the truth, isn't it? You wouldn't last a day here, but not because you're weak. Because the strength it takes to live this life isn't loud. It isn't in your arms or your voice. It's in what you choose to hold on to even when everything else is taken. A locket, a poem, a ritual, a name. So as you close your eyes tonight, tucked into a cot that still smells faintly of rosemary and wax, you carry those stories with you, not just because they're sad, not just because they're true, but because they matter in the quietest, fiercest way possible. Tomorrow the world outside will keep pretending it doesn't see them. But you'll know better. You'll remember the laughter in the cellar, the girls dancing barefoot, the ledger that never really told the whole story. And when you dream, may it be of birds in flight, hands that hold without hurting, and walls that protect instead of trap. Sleep well.